Ada, thank you very much for having me. A couple points before I get started into the content and substance of the discussion. Number one, I am at the Defense Security Cooperation University in Washington, D.C. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Whenever I say that word, that name, I immediately think back to Voltaire's description of the Holy Roman Empire being neither Holy Roman nor an empire. So it's a little pretentious to call ourselves a university. We're not there yet. We're basically a budding staff college, but we have ambitions that if anybody's interested in, I'm more than happy to go offline and discuss that with you. The second thing is the Defense Security Cooperation University is a part of the Department of Defense. So I am a Department of Defense employee, although I'm a professor. So I have what we like to call academic freedom. But to exercise my academic freedom, I have to do it responsibly. And the most responsible thing I can do right now is to tell you that nothing I say represents or is reflective of the United States government's policy on anything. It's my own personal opinion and views, informed through many, many years of working in Central and Eastern Europe. I've worked in Armenia. It's been many years ago, but I have been to Yerevan a few times. I had the great pleasure of being driven. Thank God I didn't have to drive from Tbilisi to Yerevan. I would still probably be on that road without road signs. And when they did have them, they were in Georgian or your beautiful alphabet. So I have seen part of your country. I've been to your country, and I've worked with your Ministry of Defense and General Staff. And I'm supervising one of your brilliant colonels, and for his PhD dissertation. So, as I said, I've worked in the region many, many years. In fact, I'm talking to you today from Poland. I'm part organizer, and I'm giving a paper tomorrow to a conference that is put on every year by the Chief of Defense in Poland. This is his annual strategy conference. So that's why I cannot be with you, otherwise I would have to make it to Yerevan for this very important meeting. We had a very good discussion yesterday about the terrible situation in which your country finds itself. And my dear friend and colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, British Army retired, is actually having a meeting with your Chief of Defense, and he will join us in a bit. Yesterday we talked about appeasement, and today I wanted to try to give you broader context of what you need to think about as you look at reforming, rethinking, reorienting, transforming, use whichever word you like, your armed forces. And one of the questions I always like to ask everybody is, what are the impediments? The impediments are everything. But I think at this point in your history, in your circumstances, I don't really think you have much of a choice. But let me give you some comparative views on this. It saves you the trouble of reading my rather long, boring book that Ara talked about, because I think this is going to help inform the way you consider going forward with rethinking. As I said yesterday, you have a thinking problem. That means you have to rethink the way you do defense. The first issue you're going to run into is that you have a culture that may be Armenian in your armed forces, but it may very well be something quite external and exogenous to you. By that, I mean the Soviet military institutional mindset is like intellectual concrete. It is immovable. You cannot form it, you cannot shape it. It is right in the middle of the road that you want to go down to a better future. Glenn, who will be with us shortly, we can regale you with stories from Estonia to Ukraine. We've worked in every country in Central and Eastern Europe. sometimes for a few weeks, a few months, as I did in Armenia, sometimes for many, many years. I've spent 12 years in and out of Ukraine, 6 years in and out of Moldova. I've been Serbia, Poland. I mean, I've lived here. So I feel I have a pretty good comparative understanding of what the communist defense institution was like, even if you have three different types: Soviet, Warsaw Pact, or Yugoslav. At the end of the day, they share a lot of commonalities. And I probably, some of the biggest challenges you're going to have to overcome is these institutional cultural traits, which are almost impossible to get rid of. It's so seductive. The military doctrine, as they call it, we would call it maybe defense policy. They call it, Voshka Doctrina, you say in Serbian, similar in Russian. The reason being is that it answers all of your questions. It enables you to do one job and one job only, and you're never held accountable or responsible for your actions. It's perfect, and it's scientific, and it's done almost magically back in Moscow or wherever, Yerevan, Kyiv, and trying to break that is going to be probably your biggest challenge, is how to get beyond that. How do you expect Armenian soldiers, officers, non-commissioned officers, if you ever get any professional ones, to use their brains, to be not just to be enabled, but to be expected and to be rewarded for using their critical thinking? This will be a huge task, and this is only going to happen if you have continuous political oversight and pressure on the institution and enlightened leadership within the institution. In some ways, I wish the Office of the Secretary of Defense back in 2016 had taken my advice in Ukraine, which was, I don't think you can really reform that organization, having worked in it for 12 years. I think they need to start something different, something anew, and just slowly drain the resources from it and put it into this wholly new institution. Different uniforms, different symbology, invent new mythical traditions. It doesn't matter. It has to be the antithesis of the old system. Because even something as simple as symbology will push somebody down the road back to that way of thinking. I'll give you an example. We had, after 2015, we had nonstop number of American Army officers and NCOs coming to Ukraine trying to help, being sent by our Department of Defense. And I had one of the first things I told these guys and girls when they arrived in Kyiv is I said, please, please, please do not ever say the word doctrine. If you say doctrine, you and I will lose the audience or that engagement for a couple of hours. Why is that? I said, because it's a false cognate. In their system, when you say doctrine, they hear doctrina. And doctrina, again, is the scientifically based, big operational plan in the sky. And okay, I only have to do this. It's just don't even go there with them. But this is to give you an idea of how challenging it is to be able to have meaningful reform in a country while you're still keeping an old organization with the old traditions and even something as simple as symbology and traditions. So think very hard about that because as we've seen in Ukraine, and the point that I like to make to everybody, if they'll listen to me, is the Ukrainians have done a remarkably good job. But notice I say the Ukrainians. By that, Ukrainian civil society is what's beating the Russians. They're beating them every day. They haven't won. They sure as hell haven't lost. It isn't the Ministry of Defense. It isn't the General Staff. It isn't land forces. It isn't the National Guard. It isn't the SBU. It's territorial defense, volunteer battalions, and then the volunteers themselves. People from Ukrainian life across the country, quitting their jobs and cooking soup and delivering soup to soldiers year in, year out with their own money. We estimate about 40% of the logistics being consumed at the front line is being provided by civil society. That's self-organizing. That has nothing to do with the Ministry of Defense, nothing to do with the government. So when people tell me who's going to win the war, I'm like, well, it's obvious, Ukrainians. Why do you say that? Because nobody in Russia is doing this. There's no civil society in Russia. Nobody's self-organizing to support the armed forces, or it doesn't happen. It's happening in Ukraine, and it's being sustained. So if I were being asked my advice by the Ministry of Defense, by the Minister of Defense, by your president, by your prime minister, I would say, you have to change your armed forces, which means you have to get rid of what you've got. I don't know how you do that in the midst of a war. Because as I said yesterday, Armenia has been at war since, I don't know, 1988, 1989. Let's not confuse ourselves with hybrid war and gray zone and all this. War is war, as Clausewitz told us. And he wasn't wrong. You have another state that has great designs upon your territory and your statehood. That sounds to me to be not just great power competition or small country competition. It sounds to me to be like war. And by the way, people have been getting shot and killed since 1988 on a regular basis. Another issue you're going to have is, and I probably should have sent you a slide beforehand, or I apologize, but maybe Lilat somebody can put up on the screen at some point. There's a very, very influential Dutch sociologist by the name of Geert Hofstede, Hofstede. And he developed what's called cultural tools, or the cultural compass. And I invite you, particularly Americans, to get onto that website, to the cultural tool, where you can do comparisons. And do a comparison between Armenia and the United States. Chalk and cheese, 180 degrees out. So if you look at the key factors that Glenn and I like to look at is power distance, which is, if you have high power distance, you will never tell truth to power. The guy at the top is the boss, and you expect him to be the boss. In Slovakia, it's an absolute 100. There's no other country where I've seen this. In Armenia, I think it's 80-something. It's very high. In the United States, it's about 30-something. In other words, in America, we have absolutely no problem going to the boss and saying, hey, boss, I think that's wrong. Sorry, that's wrong. You can't do that, sir. Don't do it. I just had a conversation half hour ago with a U.S. Army colonel, and we were laughing and talking about, our sergeants and how it's our sergeants who, in effect, determine who will be the officers. Because if you have a young lieutenant who goes to a unit, and if the first sergeant goes to the company commander and says, get rid of him, he's no good, that company commander and that battalion commander will not overrule that sergeant. Or if he does, he's going to do it for a very good reason, and he's going to lose a lot of face and a lot of credibility. But we expect our sergeants to do that. It isn't just allowed. You're not going to get promoted unless you take the initiative and you do these sorts of things. How do you do that in your system? I suspect not using the current organization and institutional culture that you have now. You're going to have to do something else. I don't know what it is. I think every country has their own way. The Ukrainians have done it in a remarkably decentralized manner, again, with very high power distance, very high what we call uncertainty avoidance, which means I don't like uncertainty. I'm not willing to take risks. Americans, we're crazy. We take risks all the time. It doesn't bother us. And also in a culture, that has systematic, widespread corruption and a very low level of mutual trust. But they've done it. And it isn't because they've done it since February of last year. They've been doing it since the Orange Revolution. And then you saw it really manifest itself in the Maidan. And then since this war began. So you have, like I said yesterday, you have a thinking problem. What is the solution? I have no idea. Only you're going to be able to figure that out. Lessons learned from Ukraine is what Glenn wanted us to talk about. I'm happy to, that might be better interrogatively. We can get into specifics. He's the expert. He watches it a lot closer than me, but I can definitely field a lot of those questions. He did ask me that we should probably talk about education, and particularly military education, and why it's so hard to change. Okay, I'm going to give you a very unofficial perspective. NATO will not be able to help you change your educational system. They've been helping for the last, I don't know, 20 years. Obviously, it hasn't worked, has it? You're going to have to do something different. You're going to have to look at your professors, your instructors, because as I tell my boss, since I'm her senior academic advisor, the president of the university, as I tell her every time she hires somebody, as I say, boss, never forget, people are curricula. You don't train a professor to teach, you don't train me to teach brain surgery as an economist. Why would you? This is preposterous. You go out, you find the expertise. And that's what you should do. And keep it very small. And do not teach von Clausewitz. Do not teach Thucydides. You need to teach soldiers and officers how to think, how to be creative, how to fix things, how to experiment, expect them to experiment. Has anybody in the Armenian armed forces, have anybody ever done experimentation? I think we all know the answer to that. You need to, not just with drones, but with infantry tactics, with how you place your guns, how you use operational fires with drones, bad guy drones that are looking for your artillery. You need to think harder. You have to, as we like to say, you have to be smarter than the problem. The bad thing is you now know what the problem is. The Azeris have changed. They haven't changed a lot. Maybe they've only changed in very, very minor ways, but they changed enough. And that implies to me that you're going to have to really rethink from first principles what you're going to have to do to reorient, reorganize, transform, whatever you want to call your armed forces. Glenn also said we should talk about the usual military challenges. You've got probably the worst one of all. Maybe Ukraine is even in worse state, which is you're fighting a war and you've got old equipment that barely functions in the modern battle space. You don't have a lot of money and you need new kit. And unfortunately, I wish this had been recognized prior to February 2022, because everything you buy now is probably going to be 40% more expensive than it was 18 months ago. It's just the simple supply and demand of defense and global defense industry. You're going to have to retrain with it because you cannot use Western equipment using Soviet, now Russian techniques and procedures. My dear friend Gerard, we've been arguing this, my PhD candidate, for the last 4 years. We've known each other. We've had great debates over whether or not this can be done. One proposal I've seen, I've been working with our Air Force in Europe, with our Ukrainian Air Force colleagues, with the modernization of their Air Force, and a Polish-American consortium have put together this idea that we can get we can get the Ukrainians into F-16 cockpits, we can get them into the air, and we can basically use F-16s as Sukhois. Limited bombing of targets, very, very limited air-to-air. Okay, Gerard, that's one example of where that might work. But, and what choice do you have? Because if you want that pilot to be able to do all the missions that airplane is capable of doing, you're looking at least 2 years of pretty intense mission-specific training. And they don't have 2 years. So, again, innovative ideas like this, they may be cockamamie, they may not work, but that's why you experiment. And in the case of the Ukrainians, at the same time, we need to be training other pilots who are going to be fully mission capable to be able to do all of the different missions, suppression of enemy air defense, combat air patrol, all of those things that you would expect out of a multi-role fighter aircraft. So that's one example of how you might want to think about doing this. And then, the last point that Glenn and I thought we'd raise is the whole issue of the international community. What can it do? What should it do? And how do you make yourself enticing so that foreign governments want to help you? I mean, you live in a pretty nasty neighborhood. I think there's again, I'm not going to pass judgment on your diplomacy. I think you've survived, so, I think that in itself tells us a lot. But you may have to rethink that, because as we said earlier, this is not solely a military problem. This is a societal problem, and it has to be societal because it is existential at the end of the day, which is kind of a bad way of saying it, but I don't know a better way of saying it. I think everybody in this audience probably agrees with me on that. So I'll say, and all right, why don't I stop there? Glenn's still not back, which is good, which means he's having a good discussion with the Chad. Let's hope. If he wasn't, he would have been thrown out of the office an hour ago. So let's discuss and debate. Challenge me. I'm happy to address any issue you might have.
Hi everyone, my name is Edgar Komtsan. I'm just have concerns about our country security. So just wanted to ask you if one thing I'll kind of take from this whole discussion is like work with reality. And when we work with reality, we have this situation with government, no feedback loops. We have what we have. And my question is, what we can do as a society to improve country security. It can be in both defense sector, in information sector. I know my question has drawbacks because basically I'm asking how society can replace the government, but at least, curious to know. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think that if you want to do something, then the most powerful tool you've got is the pen, and that you've got to use the pen as much and as often as possible. But as I go back, if you get critical about the government, then you're never going to get anywhere. You have to be persuasive. It's like excuse me, government, but I mean, it's like with bad children. If you smack them, you don't make them any better. You need sweets, you need encouragement, you need things that will actually draw people in the right direction for you. So I just counsel, think about how you write things, think about how you do things. You can do lots as society. You could talk about even just writing articles about, doing your bit for your country and things like this. And, discussing, is there value for society and for business and for things of soldiers doing conscription? Do they come out of it better? I don't know. I haven't done conscription here. So, there are lots of things you can do. Think out of the box. Don't just think directly, I don't like this. Try and think of all the positives that you can get, and you'll get more positives if you produce positives, especially if it's questioning discussion.
Okay. Ուրեմն ես ներկայացնում եմ հասարակական կազմակերպություն Art of Survival, ողջունալու արվեստ, մենք պարապացնում ենք քաղաքացիական անձանց, կատարում ենք ինժեներական աշխատանքներ, մասնակցել ենք տարբեր գործողություններին։ Իմ հարցս հետևյալն է. Դուք ձեր երկրներում, երկու մեր հյուրերին էլ հարցը ուզում եմ տամ, ձեր երկրներում ունեք նմանատիպ հասարակական կազմակերպություններ, ոնց են իրան գործում, ոնց են համագործակցում պետության հետ, ու ինչ գնահատական կտակ, եթե տենց աշխատանք կա իրանց կողմից, մեկ էլ կուզենանք փորձի փոխանակում ստանալ այդ տիպի կազմակերպություններից։ Շնորհակալություն։
The answer is we don't have similar things. We have 2,000 NGOs working with veterans. In other words, people who've left the army, mainly doing, job search, job-related employment things, retraining, and social support. But actually, most of our system is designed to produce and do what we need. So we don't need societal NGO support for it. We might do if we go to war, though, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, can I just say, in the United States, anybody can organize an organization, create an organization. I mean, Ara just did so with this institute, and if they choose to have a relationship with the government, that's fine. But that's one of the problems one talks about on the battlefield in working with NGOs, in that they work for themselves. And so there's, at least in our society, now we have common law. Glenn and I are coming from common law countries. We don't really need to have permission. If there's any money, there may be tax consequences, but otherwise, there's no, unless the NGO wants to be coordinated, they will not be coordinated. So I think that's probably situationally dependent upon your laws and how your governance sees these sorts of organizations. My experience in Central and Eastern Europe is that the governments typically see these organizations in a very hostile way, as they did initially in Ukraine back in 14 and 15, Glenn.
Thank you, Tom. Although I said 2 questions, out of deference to Lilith, we're adding a 3rd question.
Oh, that's fine.
Hi, thank you for sharing your perspectives. I have a question going back to the perceptions that they have of Armenia in, let's say, UK and the US. What you just said about us being invisible, is it only about average society, or also relates to the, let's say, political elite? For example, for BP, I'm sure we're not 50-50. And also, if we look at this fantasy of the so-called Zangezur corridor that Azerbaijan has, if they didn't want it with the Russian control, wouldn't it be something that would be attractive to NATO? It would give it direct access to Caspian?
No.
Why not?
Because we're not fighting there. Because there's no interest there.
Caspian?
Yeah, but what does NATO want the Caspian Sea for? NATO is North Atlantic Treaty, and it's got a boundary which is quite clear. It can reach we've got enough weapons to reach the Caspian Sea from America without needing to come over here. And as for Shell, Shell's a business. It's a world business. They are different. Nobody reads what Shell writes. Don't get, that I get up in the morning and I open Shell's webpage to see whether they're writing about Armenia. I don't, nor does anybody else. Okay, so in average, the perception is 0. In other words, you do not enter the interest box of 99.99999% of the population of Great Britain at all.
What about the decision
Most
makers,
cannot
though?
even put where you are on the map. Yeah. I'm being serious now, and Tom will say the same. Even in DC, that there's desk officers for Armenia who will be interested. But in our Foreign Office, I am fairly sure that the desk officer for Armenia has got about 8 countries. Okay, so unless you register on one of those, and then if they write a brief about it, who does it go to? Minister. What does Minister do with it? Is he going to get excited and speak in Parliament about Armenia? No. Why? Why would he? Doesn't change his voting.
So would it be safe to say, even though there is strategic value, let's say, to Syunik and the corridor and so on, in order to flush that out, you need to have much more advocacy?
Much more advocacy, much more. And you have to make the case for it. Don't expect NATO to make the case for you or Great Britain to make the case for you. They will not do so. Not for you. So you have to make the case for yourself of why this is a value.
Turkey and Azerbaijan taking over is going to
No, I don't think. Remember, NATO is a collection of countries. NATO is not an organization that has a thinking brain for international relations. Okay, so nobody's going to support. NATO is not going to support anything apart from its own defense. So it's not reaching out there and looking at this and saying, "Oh, we need to worry about this." Not at all. It's only worried about, have we got enough money to buy what stuff we got to buy this time? Have we got the next whatever we got to do in the Baltic states and things like this? It's going to be inward looking for things like this. Yeah, but so what? But
yes.
but Russia, but okay, for Russia, but Iran is not fighting NATO, and it's not about to invade the Baltic states or Bulgaria.
But maybe to close this out, but
yes,
just an
let's close.
observation. Just an observation. I've worked in Washington. My current assignment is in Washington. Washington is a very, very busy place. And when you go to the Department of State and when you go to Department of Defense, everybody is working very, very hard in a very narrow area of expertise and responsibility. There's very few people that kind of go cross-cut. Number one. Number two. So yes, there are people that are thinking about this part of the world, but there's you could probably know all of them in like 2 days, probably less. And then the last point is, this may not be a very popular point, but I'll say it. Your greatest strategic asset is your diaspora in the United States, because they, like my dear friends, the American Jews, have figured out that the way to help their country, their homeland, is through Congress. So I had dinner last year with a Belarusian, dissident who was a member of their government in exile, and he asked me, how can we influence the United States? And he says, there's one lady in Department of State we deal with. I said, you're talking to the wrong people. You need to energize, the Belarusian, diaspora, such as it is in the United States, and go to Congress. Why? Because Congress does the authorization, which allows you to do things. And then number two, they appropriate the money to actually allow you to go out and do it. So again, as I said, the diaspora is rarely appreciated, but your diaspora in the United States punches far, far above its weight. And an example of that is Mr. Araz right there with you this week, and Leela. You're welcome.
Here.
On that very generous note,
And
thank you,
me.
Tom.
And me,
Thank you for,
I'm also, even though I'm not Armenian, I'm part of the Armenian advocacy group.
But here is where we'll close on this point. But when we do think of the diaspora, we also have to think of just not the diaspora, but the diaspora and the networks that the individual diasporans bring to the table. So when people think of our diaspora, we do have to think of a much wider network, actually. And this conference is an example of that. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Tom, for your time. Thank you for accommodating our schedule. You've been very generous. And thank you for your friendship. Glenn, likewise. Thank you, Lily. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And now we will have our next panel discussion. Halin and Anna.
Yes.
Right. Hi. Hi, guys. It's Fisik.
Lava.
Hari Luis. Avik. Good. Okay. You may begin.
Oh, okay.
You are live here.
Oh, I see yours. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Mehrabian. I am a law student in the United States, in New Jersey at Rutgers Law School. I study international law, and I'm here with Talin Hitik to talk about international law and its impact on Armenia and on Artsakh. International law has been a key player in every step of this conflict, but as Armenians, we haven't always utilized it to the fullest extent of its capabilities, nor have we always recognized its limitations. And so I'm here today with Talin Hitik, who is a US-based attorney specializing in public international law and international human rights law. I'm actually really excited to be speaking to her. She's the principal attorney at Hitik Law and the founder and director of Hitik Law Pro Bono Human Rights Program, which advocates for the security and rights of Artsakh Armenians within international legal frameworks. She previously worked at the Hague Conference on Private International Law and the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And she has been a lecturer at on various subjects of public international law, as well as at Yerevan State University and at the American University of Armenia. She also served as the international expert to the Armenian Ministry of Justice and European Court of Human Rights for the European Court of Human Rights Division. So the overarching themes of this, interview are going to be what mechanisms we can use to vindicate the rights of Artsakhis, and what aspects of international law are useful to us, and which ones we as a movement should be challenging, because not all of it is going to support the things that we want, and we should recognize those limitations and try and be involved in the conversation about changing them. So Tallinn, maybe I can ask you to introduce where we are, how we got there, and maybe what some of our options are, and then we can go from there.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for that introduction. And let me just first say thank you to the Institute for Security Analysis and to all of the conference co-hosts, all of the organizations for this kind of invitation. I also just want to say I'm so sorry I'm not able to be there with you in Yerevan. I wish I could have been there in person, but I am very happy to participate nonetheless. So I thought I would just sort of give an overview for several minutes to basically where we were, where we are now, and where we're going from a legal perspective. And then I'll invite Anna as well as the audience to ask some questions. We'll open it up to a conversation. So for now, I'll just present for just a few minutes. Today we stand at a crucial precipice. Indeed, the fate of the Republic of Artsakh and its people will be determined not in the coming years, but likely in a matter of months. There are options to ensuring the rights and security of the people of Artsakh, as well as the Republic of Artsakh, and a meaningful and durable peace in the region, including for the Republic of Armenia, of course. If you take nothing else away from this discussion today, I hope that you will walk away with this. Doing nothing is not an option. Indecision and total inaction are not options. I'm going to focus my remarks on the legal perspective of what has happened, where we are now, and where we're going. And I will present a few options that we might have. I hope that everyone listening will start to take those tools, think about other options, and decide where we might go so that we can create a strategic plan for both the Republic of Artsakh and its people. Some of the ideas I'm going to introduce may seem far-fetched, but know that most of these ideas, or all of them, have successfully been used in history. They will, of course, require a lot of political will. They will require the will of the people of Artsakh, the will of the Republic of Armenia to participate as a stakeholder, and the will of the international community. Most importantly, states that are powerful enough to intervene and change the situation on the ground. So the first thing I'm going to start with is a legal perspective of the past, which is to address the dissolution decree. As I'm sure everyone in the audience is very well aware, the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, or as I will use the term Artsakh today, was dissolved by a decree, or was supposedly dissolved by a decree on September 28th, 2023. I just want to, at the outset, point out that this dissolution decree has no legal effect under either domestic or international law. The internal laws of the Republic of Artsakh, it is a constitutional republic, do not allow for the dissolution decree in the manner that it took place, basically by Samvel Sharamanyan to just issue a decree. I also just want to point out that none of us have ever seen the actual decree signed by Mr. Sharamanyan. There was only an official telegram post by the government of Artsakh about the fact that he had signed the decree. So that's important to point out. But the main point is that the Artsakh constitution is not set up in the way that a dissolution decree could be could be done by one person. In fact, on October 20th, Mr. Sharamanyan, who was already in Yerevan, said the exact same thing and proclaimed to a crowd of his displaced compatriots that no one man can dissolve the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, and that his signing had no legal effect. So that's the first point. The second point is around the use of force or coercion. It's an established norm of international law that agreements signed under coercion or use of force do not have any legal effect. This mainly comes from the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, Article 52, which dictates that a treaty is void if its conclusion has been procured by the threat or use of force in violation of the principles of international law and embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. I'm not going to go into the story here. I'm sure most people in the audience are well aware of the circumstances, which were essentially at gunpoint of representatives of the Republic of Artsakh meeting with representatives of Azerbaijan. Very quickly after that meeting, there was the dissolution of the Artsakh Defense Army, and then eventually the dissolution of the state, so-called, and then we have the mass exodus of the entire population. I think this is a textbook sign of coercion and use of force, and I don't think any international legal scholar would disagree with the facts on the ground, meeting the definition of coercion. So that's basically about the dissolution decree. So if we take what I'm saying at face value, and we believe that the dissolution decree does have no legal effect under either domestic or international law, where does that leave us today? What, in fact, is the Republic of Artsakh or the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh today? Well, if you believe in any way that it was a state, then that would obviously conclude that it is still a state since it has not dissolved. I thought it might be useful for us to have a brief overview, just a reminder for everyone, of the factors that go into statehood. These are widely accepted elements of a state under international law. This comes mainly from the Montevideo Convention of 1933, and it lists 4 main factors for an entity to be considered a state under international law. 1, a defined territory. More on this later. 2, a permanent population. 3, a government. And 4, the capacity to enter into international relations or to have diplomatic relations in general. So that is essentially where we are now. If you believe that the Republic of Artsakh met these factors under the Montevideo Convention, which a lot of legal scholars have argued, a lot of non-Armenian legal scholars, I would point out, have argued that it does in fact meet this definition. And if it has not in fact dissolved, then I just want to point out to you that there is a very good chance that it has not dissolved and that it may be maintained. And it's important for us to figure out how and whether there is any intent at all for us to maintain it. So what should we be doing right now as we sit here today? What steps do we need to take to not preclude the status of statehood? So I would posit that the residents of Artsakh should not take citizenship of the Republic of Armenia if that option becomes available, if there is any likelihood or any desire among the people of Artsakh and among the stakeholders in the Republic of Armenia to preserve any status of statehood. So that's one thing to not do. Do not take full citizenship of the Republic of Armenia, which is not an issue today, but it might become an issue soon. Essentially, do not show any intent of full abandonment of the sovereign territory that you once inhabited. This language is coming from a case in the International Court of Justice. Basically, the intention must be manifestly clear and without any doubt that the population intends to return to its sovereign territory and that they have not abandoned their sovereign territory. Okay, so these are the things that all the stakeholders should be thinking about not precluding, at least not saying right now as we sit here today, that taking actions that would in fact dissolve the Republic of Artsakh. So where do we go from here, and what options are available to us under international law? Very briefly, I'll just point out 3 options, and then in my discussion with Anna, we can get into all of the details around each one of these options. But I'll present you with these 3 options, and then I'll stop there. Option number 1, the people of Artsakh take steps to preserve the Artsakh Republic and decide that one day they will return to the Artsakh Republic. Option number 2, the people of Artsakh do not attempt to preserve their republic, but instead decide to return to their homes in the territory under the Azerbaijan effective control. And option number 3, the people of Artsakh do not attempt to preserve their republic, and they do not decide to return to their homes, and they push for restitution and compensation for all of their personal and real property lost in their homeland. I realize that a lot of these options are difficult for us to not only intellectually, but emotionally grasp. I understand, because I'm there with you as a diasporan Armenian. But I have to impress upon you that not doing anything is simply not an option. If we do nothing, and by we, I mean the Armenian diaspora, the former residents of the Republic of Artsakh, as well as government stakeholders in the Republic of Armenia, if we, that communal we, do nothing at all, then what will happen is most likely Azerbaijan will re-inhabit all of the homes of the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. In fact, they are already doing so. This will lead to the former residents of Artsakh getting no compensation and no reparations for their lost property. And then, in addition to that, this will lead to them continuing as residents of the Republic of Armenia without full citizenship of Armenia, and essentially will lose the Republic of Artsakh irreversibly, while leaving the residents of Artsakh essentially as stateless persons under the definition of stateless persons in international law. So these are just a few of the options we have in front of us. And again, I want to urge everyone to start to think about these issues if you have not already. And just remember that you have more resources than you probably think. You have support, you have expertise, you probably have more answers to the questions that you have. So just keep asking those questions and start to think through what possible solutions there could be. But again, inaction is not an option. And I'll stop there with that brief overview, and then I'll invite Anna to ask questions as well as the audience. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tallinn. That was extremely informative. And I think that it's important that we have a real sense of what actual legal mechanisms are available to us, because we often band-aid out international law without really understanding what the real parameters of it are. I want to start right where you left off. You talked about preserving the sovereignty of the Republic of Artsakh. And I think that, you mentioned that we have a lot of different stakeholders, not only in Armenia, but right in this audience. We have citizens of Artsakh, we have citizens of Armenia, and we also have diasporan Armenians. And if we set a goal, or if Artsakhtsis themselves set a goal of preserving the sovereignty of Artsakh, they also have to continue to be able to probably live in Armenia. So how can we both support the goal of preserving Artsakh sovereignty while also supporting the practical day-to-day rights and lives of Artsakhtsis who are now, practically speaking, refugees in Armenia and are facing issues like difficulty securing jobs or housing or housing inadequacy? How can they preserve their sovereignty while dealing with these day-to-day issues?
Thank you for that question. So At the outset of answering this, I just want to give a very big caveat, which is really important for me to establish. Every answer we have to possible resolution to any of these really historic challenges has to come from a place of preserving the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Armenia, who is housing their ethnic compatriots that have been massively displaced from their home in the Republic of Artsakh. So we have to look at this from a place of how do we maintain a lasting and durable peace in the region? Or how do we establish the peace? We don't even have that peace right now. How do we establish a lasting and durable peace in the region? And how do we protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Republic of Armenia? Those have to be first and foremost in all of the issues that we're talking about. And frankly, anecdotally, I will say that everyone I have spoken to who is a displaced resident of the Republic of Artsakh would absolutely agree. First and foremost, we all as Armenians have to protect the Republic of Armenia. So that being said, I would advise, I would just point out one option that works, that has worked in history. Well, works is kind of a relative term, but one option that has functioned in history is the option of a government in exile. A government in exile would essentially look like a sovereign state or a self-governing people with some sort of form of a legitimate government. So expressing some desire to have political power and legal power amongst themselves. So self-governing in some way. And who decide to reside in a foreign state with the plan to one day return to their home state. This is usually the case as a result of a use of force or a military intervention or a military occupation on their home state. There are three principal historical examples. So there's basically three different buckets of what we would call a government in exile. One is a lawfully elected and traditional authentic exile who do not challenge the existence of a given state, but claim title as its genuine representative. So an example of this would be the deposed Spanish Republican government, which existed from the outset of the Spanish Civil War through the 1930s until the first democratic elections of Spain in 1977. So this is a lawfully elected government in exile. The second example is governments aspiring to statehood, which have the characteristics of decolonization. An example of this is the Sawari Arab Democratic Republic, which was formed to challenge the annexation of Western Sahara by Morocco. And then the third type of government in exile is a deposed regime struggling to regain power, lost to a foreign invader. I would posit that Artsakh Armenians probably fall somewhere in category number 3, if there were ever a government in exile established for the people of Artsakh.
Does Armenia risk any elements of its own sovereignty by setting up legal structures within it that support a government in exile within its boundaries for the people of Artsakh?
No, Armenia does not risk any elements of its own sovereignty. I'll give you an example of the Tibet Authority has been functioning in India with India's consent, and India is still a sovereign state. I think the obvious point, though, is that usually a government in exile will have to be handed over a building to function as a physical building to function as its headquarters of some sort. And it's a good idea for the government in exile to actually govern its own people and govern itself. But what that looks like doesn't have to carve out any territory from the sovereign Republic of Armenia. It's not necessary to carve out territory and hand that territory over to the Republic of Artsakh. Just remember that the whole point of even conceptualizing a government in exile is that you have lost your territory as a former state or a former self-governing people, and you are no longer able to be on your territory, but you nonetheless wish to preserve the other elements of statehood.
You mentioned also, you mentioned 3 different buckets of different types of government in exile, and suggested that the Artsakh, a potential Artsakh government in exile would fall more likely into the third one of a deposed regime that's dealing with a foreign invader. Do you see any similarity, or do you, like in the second bucket of the decolonization narrative, that there is a colonial project that Azerbaijan is undertaking in the Republic of Artsakh and has always been pushing for? Or is that not a useful framing under international law? Because decolonization, as sometimes we understand it colloquially, can be very different than how it's delineated under international law.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't see the legal and historical parallels between the regional dispute between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh as parallel to the decolonization process of the 60s and 70s, most notably in the global South. I don't see those functions as quite parallel. The one thing I would say, though, that is important for us to remember when we're talking about this, let me put it this way. What's useful about the colonization framework here is that we remember that the people, the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, are indigenous to that land. So we need to keep remembering whenever we are advocating on behalf of the people of Artsakh, or whenever we're framing the issue for non-Armenians and for the international community, we have to remember to point out the actual facts that they are an indigenous people. In other words, they were present on that land since any civilization was established on that land, and before any takeover or colonization of that territory, they were present there. That's the general definition under the International Labor Organization definition of an indigenous people. So your point is well taken. That framework is extremely useful to us in the sense that we need to keep pointing out that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, the ethnic Armenians, are indigenous people. And that also, by the way, gives them a right. As refugees, they have the right to return, but they also have specific rights given to them as the indigenous people to the region.
The other reason I ask is because there are also quotes from Azerbaijani officials which indicate a resettlement project, a project throughout the Soviet Union of attempting to change population numbers through force, which or through maneuvering, I guess, which also lends itself to the colonization narrative, but we don't really fall neatly into one or into that category in international law. And I'm wondering which mechanisms we might be able to look to use creatively, if at all.
Look, I mean, this may be a little bit tangential to your point, but I was listening to the 2 eminent speakers that came right before our panel. And it's really helpful and useful to have non-Armenians discussing these issues with us in a deep way, because both of them said something, or they were discussing and they agreed with each other. No one considers this region. No one considers this region, and no one knows the history the way that diasporan Armenians and residents of Armenia and Artsakh know the history of this region. They can't, and they shouldn't. And I say that to point out that according to everyone else in the world, and everyone essentially outside of this conference room, Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan internationally recognized territory. Now, I find that frustrating. I find that painful as an international legal scholar. Well, I'm sorry. I mean, we need to deal with facts here, and we need to deal with the perception of everyone else except for us. And frankly, that's a result of us being completely silent for 30 years. So we were not didactic. we were not teaching the international community the actual historical facts on the ground. We were not establishing ourselves as you know, the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic was established by a referendum that actually predated the referendum of Azerbaijan. Those are the historical facts. Those are the facts. So it actually isn't even possible legally for the Republic of Azerbaijan to have ownership or title to the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh because they were independent earlier in time. We have to remember what the international community thinks of the region, if they know anything at all. And what they think is that Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan's sovereign territory. So we have to start there. We have to start with that narrative. And if there's any desire or hope at all to return home and to reestablish a republic, we have got to start to deconstruct that narrative immediately, frankly, yesterday.
Does that perception change the ability of, so one of the factors of statehood that you listed is the capacity to engage in international relations. And I'm assuming a government in exile has to have at least some of the qualities that a state does. They have to be able to engage in some of these factors. So if the international community doesn't recognize the legitimate statehood of the territorially the Republic of Artsakh that existed on a designated territory, how can a government exile overcome both that hurdle and also the other hurdles that are sort of natural to having a government without a territory?
That's a very good question. Thank you for the question. So just as a really brief review, so we have the 4 categories are 1, defined territory, 2, permanent population, 3, government, and 4, capacity to enter into international relations. So I would posit that essentially elements 2, 3, and 4 are the elements of statehood that could, if there was a desire, be preserved by the people of Artsakh within the Republic of Armenia, frankly, within Russia, within Los Angeles. I mean, it doesn't matter where they are because they've already lost that first element of a defined territory, which is why they would be a government in exile of their home, of their territory. So any one of all of those 3 last factors could and should be preserved in some way. And to your point, Anna, the capacity to enter into international relations, in my mind, is frankly one of the easiest ones to accomplish.
Okay.
I mean, basically, all you really have to do in practical terms is find a diasporan, make them a citizen of the Republic of Artsakh, and then have them, be in their home country as a diplomat. You could even set up a building for them, set up an office for them, and give them diplomatic representation, and just have them show their face everywhere. One of the former speakers said that that Armenian Americans in the diaspora punch above their weight because we understand that the way to get things done is to lobby in Congress. That's exactly what we could be doing as representatives of government in exile of the Republic of Artsakh. And there's been successful models of that in the past. I would look to Tibet as a pretty successful model of gaining international recognition.
It's interesting that you mentioned Tibet because, I think that the international examples that you've listed are not the ones that traditionally float around the conversation. Like we talk about Kosovo, and these aren't the comparisons that are traditionally drawn. Is there a limitation on what our imaginations have been looking at in terms of previous examples? Is Tibet maybe the better analog for us to be looking to than something like Kosovo?
No, that's a good question. So I would say that the examples are for different processes, right? So the Tibet example is for a government that has wished to put itself in exile with the consent of another state. So with the consent of India. And I bring up that model to simply point out that it is not a risk to the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia to allow the people of Artsakh to establish a government in exile. But it is absolutely crucial that this is done in a partnership, and this is done with a mutual understanding between the government of the Republic of Armenia as well as the representatives of Artsakh. So that's why I bring up Tibet as an example specifically of a government in exile. In the Kosovo example, Kosovo never established a government in exile. Rather, Kosovo broke out of the the armed conflict in the former Yugoslavia and declared its own independence through a referendum. And then there was an advisory opinion in the International Court of Justice around whether or not the declaration of independence by Kosovo was or was not a violation of international law. And the final decision was no. The Declaration of Independence by Kosovo was not a violation of international law. So that's basically Kosovo is our example, a good historical example of what we call remedial secession, which is breaking away from a larger state and declaring independence essentially. And Tibet is a good example of a government in exile.
So I want to zoom back out to where you started, which was listing the three kind of buckets that lead to the preservation of certain rights of Artsakhi. So we've been talking a lot about the government in exile, which preserves the statehood. It preserves the Artsakh Republic. But of course, the Artsakh Republic was made up of 120,000 people, and they have various rights that they have. And so the other options you listed was not preserving the statehood of the Republic of Artsakh, but preserving the maybe practical rights under the ground and returning, for example, to live under Azerbaijan, which I think most people would find, for very reasonable reasons, untenable. But nonetheless, it's one option that is supported by some international law mechanisms. And the third one you listed was to not preserve any claim to the territory, either via statehood or private property, and pushing for compensation. I don't want to get into the mechanisms which support these two, because I think it would take a long time. But I do want to ask, what are the Armenia has been active and has been taking steps to preserve certain rights under international law. Do you think that any steps that we've taken or that we could take would put these would put any of these goals in tension? For example, are there steps that we've taken that actually don't preserve statehood, but actually would lead to one of the other two goals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I don't know where we are because I'm not in the room, and also it's challenging to get a really straight answer on where we are in the road to an actual formal peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan as a result of the tripartite statement as a result of the ceasefire from the recent armed conflict. So I will say that international law views statehood as something that coalesces over time and as something that involves a lot of intention, right? So it is under international law, and we have a lot of historical examples of this, it is not necessary for a state, excuse me, it's not necessary for a state to have sovereign territory. It might lose its territory, in fact, and still be perceived as a state under international law. But what will absolutely preclude it from being perceived as a state is if there are intentions of accepting the status quo as a non-state or as the new circumstances. So we have the circumstances right now, as we sit here today, the circumstances we have are that, as a symbol, the flag of the Republic of Azerbaijan is flying in Stepanakert. And there is a relocation program. There is a stipend being offered to ethnic Azeris who want to relocate to the newly obtained Nagorno-Karabakh. And if Armenia does not address these issues, if Armenia signs a peace treaty with Azerbaijan, where all the facts on the ground are still the status quo as we sit here today, and Armenia does not challenge the borders of Azerbaijan as enveloping all of Nagorno-Karabakh, and a peace treaty is signed where Armenia is establishing that they agree with those borders, I would imagine, and history would show us, that that's a very good indication that we're allowing the Republic of Artsakh to dissolve. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Can Armenia as a state represent the people of the Republic of Artsakh in this way in signing a peace treaty?
Listen. Armenia has been representing the interests of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh for a very, very long time. It predates both of us, frankly, and it's an arrangement that I can see how it came to be. I'm not sure that it was ever appropriate. And let me just say, I would urge the people of the former Republic of Artsakh, or the residents of the Republic of Artsakh, to just remember that they are also an entity under international law. And just like Tibet advocates for itself all the time, just like Kosovo advocates for itself all the time, and there's a myriad of other, entities that advocate for itself and represent itself in international arena. If there is any likelihood or desire or intention at all for there to be a future Republic of Artsakh, I would encourage them to advocate for themselves in international arena with partnership of Republic of Armenia.
This is a very pointed question, but what are some steps that you would not advise either the Armenian government or the Armenian diaspora, or just us as a movement, to advocate for? I know when we were speaking, you mentioned the possibility of like property restitution commissions, or the right of return under Azerbaijan. I'm not saying that like I'm asking you, are there steps like that or other ones that you wouldn't advise that we take that you think would sabotage the rights of Artsaksis?
What shouldn't we do? Well, we shouldn't sign a peace treaty where it is clear that the recognized borders of Azerbaijan envelop all of Nagorno-Karabakh. That is what we shouldn't do. And by we, I mean, obviously, in this case, the Republic of Armenia. If the Republic of Armenia, who, I mean, de facto, but not de jure, represents the interests of the people of Artsakh, if they were to go ahead and sign that peace treaty, it would pretty much, be a fait accompli for the Republic of Artsakh. I would imagine that's the way history would show it. What shouldn't we do? Well, it honestly depends on what the outcome is and what the goal is. If the outcome and goal is for any preservation of all of the Republic of Artsakh in any way, then there are things that we shouldn't do. We shouldn't preclude these elements of statehood, and we should be showing some desire or intention to preserve it through self-governance, through diplomatic relations, and those types of things. But I have to say, these are difficult questions. These are important questions. And I think everyone just has to start to try to make some sort of a decision. Being in limbo and making no decision at all isn't an option. It's not an option. So if the decision is, yes, everyone wants to return home, but what that home will look like now might look like under the effective control of Azerbaijan, they have the right to do that. I mean, the right of return under international law is established, and it's codified under international law. There are several international treaties to which Azerbaijan is a state party that establish the right of return of displaced people to their home. So it's uncontroversial that there is a right of return, and that right of return remains for the people of Artsakh. But if they were to return today or next week or next month, it is more than likely that it would be not safe without an international presence on the ground.
Thank you so much, Tallinn. I do want to shift briefly to the sort of a broader subject that we wanted to discuss, and then I will open it up to the floor for questions, as well as any questions from our online audience, which I see coming into the Q&A. I briefly want you, as an Armenian lawyer and as obviously an attorney and an international lawyer who cares about the future of Artsakhis, the future of Armenia, the future of Armenians, and also just the future of the indigenous people in this region. What are elements of international law that are supportive, and what are elements of international law that, you know, we as, like, I'm an aspiring lawyer, we as lawyers should be pushing against? We should be active, because we see, for example, from the African states, a lot of involvement in shaping international law and being involved in the shaping of like mechanisms like R2P or in the meaning of statehood or decolonization. And as Armenians, we haven't really been as involved in that kind of academic process, or, you know, from the state side, our government hasn't really been putting forward for a long, long time any vision of what the Armenian vision of international law is. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit on a broader scale of what you think some things we should be advocating for or against, or what you might articulate that vision to be.
That's a very broad question. And, you know, before I try to give some semblance of an answer, let me just say that I welcome some comments from the audience as well about this question, because it's a good question and it's one that's worthy of a discussion. I want to just pick up with something you mentioned about R2P, and I want to explain what that is for those that don't understand in the audience, because it's a pretty specific term. Basically, R2P stands for the responsibility to protect. Admittedly, it is soft law. It is not a codified legal obligation on states, but very briefly, I'll just give you sort of an overview of what it is. Essentially, the responsibility to protect has three main pillars. Number one, every state has a responsibility to protect its own population from 4 mass atrocity crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. Number two, the wider international community has the responsibility to encourage and assist those individual states in meeting that responsibility. And number three, if a state is manifestly failing to protect its populations, the international community must be prepared to take appropriate collective action in a timely and decisive manner and in accordance with the UN Charter. Now, this is a very nice idea, right? So the United Nations Security Council has mentioned and invoked the responsibility to protect in 80 different Security Council resolutions. It's also been mentioned in 13 General Assembly resolutions. So this is something that's been floating around the ether for a long time in diplomatic circles and in the United Nations. In all practicality, however, the responsibility to protect, and there's really no motivation under international law without serious interests in the region by powerful states, without understanding that their economy is at stake, that money is at stake, or that their serious interests are at stake. That's pretty much the only time that we get states to invoke responsibility to protect. And then I just wanted to give an overview of that, but Anna, I welcome you to sort of repeat the crux of your question again. Sorry about that.
No, I appreciate that. It's important to understand the things that we're talking about. The question is, what are some things about international law that we, as Armenians, as people who care about the people in this region, as lawyers, should be pushing against? What mechanisms supporting? What's our vision for what we want international law to look like?
Okay, so number one, as I mentioned, the responsibility to protect. pushing for it to actually have some teeth, for us to understand that there is a responsibility under international law to prevent atrocity crimes. And when we see that those atrocity crimes are continuing with total, complete impunity, to push for that. One way that we can push for that, by the way, is caring about the rest of the world. So I think I'm going to speak completely for myself. Anecdotally, I will say I've noticed Armenians care a lot when something is happening to ethnic Armenians, and they care slightly less when something's happening to other people in the world, especially in the global south. I would encourage us to be consistent in our language around human rights violations, mass atrocity crimes, and I will say Armenia's accession to the International Criminal Court is one avenue in which we can establish that we are among the, let me put it this way, as we say in international law, among the civilized nations, that we care about atrocity crimes committed against any population, not just ethnic Armenians. So we should be pushing against that that narrative, excuse me, that responsibility protect doesn't work. We should be trying to make sure that it works. And then the other one is, obviously, we should be challenging, as frankly everyone in the world should be challenging and thinking through a way to bind international law through Chapter 7 of the UN Security Council, by reforming the Security Council system entirely. This is a bigger discussion. We could have a whole 2-day conference, in fact, on what reform under the UN Security Council might look like. But the inability for the UN Security Council to address mass atrocity crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, is frankly abhorrent. And we need to be a part of the international movement that's pushing back against that.
I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think, even we tend to think of the allies we're looking towards as, big countries, powerful countries in the UN Security Council, but there's also a role that we have to play performing other natural alliances with the global south, or with other nations that have a more natural need to change the structure of the Security Council. And I think it's important that we start and should be a part of that conversation and a part of that movement. Thank you so much, Tallinn. I'm going to open it to the floor for questions. I see some questions here in the chat, but I want to make sure that the room also gets to ask questions first. So maybe we can take one from the room, and then I can go to the chat, and then we can go from there.
Yes, we have a question. No, here, Neil, you haven't asked a question yet this weekend, right? No. So let me go ahead.
Hello, Neil Howard, journalist based here in Yerevan. Thank you, Tallinn, for that presentation. It was really insightful, and I think especially it was, you talked about in very feasible and pragmatic terms. So I think it was really helpful in that sense. I've a number of thoughts that I had for questions, but one I think that's really salient is in terms of if a government in exile would be established, who in terms of legitimacy, who would be considered, and how would they establish legitimacy of the leader of said government? And I'm thinking of an example that's sort of close to home is Chechnya from the 90s, and the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, which has a government in exile, and even has state support now from Ukraine, and the Ukrainian parliament officially recognized the independence of them. But there's so many competing factions, and so much infighting that it's hard to say that there's even really a front runner for that. And then when I think for the candidate of legitimate leader, and then when I think of that, compared to Artsakh, let's say, obviously Samvel Shahramanian, the last president of Republic of Artsakh, but then people say, well, he wasn't elected democratically, chosen by not a nationwide vote like the other presidents were. The other presidents, of course, are in jail in Baku, and so how do you decide upon who is the legitimate leader, and what confers legitimacy upon him?
That's a really, really excellent question. So to your main point, I would say, first and foremost, whatever governing structure will look like for this hypothetical government in exile of the Republic of Artsakh, it has to be done through the Republic of Artsakh constitution only. All of the decisions must be made, and all of the processes must maintain the governance that has always and already existed in the place where you lost the territory. So if you create an entirely new government, you essentially lose the link to the government that was on the old territory, and you are no longer a government in exile. So in practical terms, all of the governing structure has to be dictated by the laws that are already in place. And that's a practical answer. And then the ideological answer, which is just as important, frankly, is that you have to do everything democratically. There has to be a democratically elected leader of government in exile. I agree with you that Samvel Shahrimanyan was not elected in accordance with the Artsakh constitution. He was not elected democratically. And frankly, that was a failure. I understand and I appreciate that pretty much every decision that the Artsakh government has made over the last several years has been under coercion, use of force, and duress, and any other word you want to use, and in a state of emergency. So I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that. But we have to take a beat, and if any decisions would be made to have some structure of self-government for the people of Artsakh, it has to be done democratically, and it has to be done in accordance with the laws that had already existed in the Republic of Artsakh. And what would that look like? Elections. You could literally have elections for the former residents of the Republic of Artsakh. It would be very difficult. Is this in the realm of reality? Sure. Would it be extraordinarily difficult? Yes. But I would just point out that, South Sudan had an entire election to have a referendum of independence for this new state that we now have in international law, South Sudan. And more than half of the vote took place in the diaspora.
I think that
sorry, go ahead.
We can treat the democracy that, as much as it struggled, that existed in Artsakh for 30 years, we can treat that as an advantage rather than, forgetting that the basic structures were there. And I think that gives us an advantage over, countries that are starting a little bit more from scratch. We did have the basic structure, or Artsakh did have the basic structures of government. And Armenia has implemented e-government, with fairly successfully recently. So the structures are there and they can be used. I want to go to thank you, Neil, for that question. I want to go to the webinar chat, where there is an interesting question from Alan Whitehorn about asking Tallinn to comment on Azerbaijan's use of the concept of the right of return for refugees from the 1990s, what the implications are for Armenia. And moderator's privilege, I'm going to amend this question a little bit. I'm so sorry, Alan. But Tallinn and I, previously when you spoke, you had also talked about Azerbaijan's other use of international law. For example, their use of Article 52, I think it was, to imply their right of self-defense. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about generally, as we use these international law mechanisms, so do they. So how can we navigate that, both when it comes to the right of return or any other mechanisms that you can think of?
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're entirely separate, but there's a parallel between, as soon as we say something, it does immediately come up, but right from the other end. So we have to kind of be sober-minded about that too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I can answer both questions pretty easily. So first and foremost, Azerbaijan residents of the territory that is Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding regions absolutely have a right of return. They are refugees under international law. They were expelled from their homeland as a result of an armed conflict, and they have a right of return. Simple. frankly, I think one of the excuse me, one of the challenges that that Armenia and the leadership in Artsakh has had over the last 30 years is that they've not recognized the right of return of the the residents of Nagorno-Karabakh and the surrounding regions that were of ethnic Azeri descent. Essentially, I would say one of our biggest mistakes is to do the exact same thing as our adversary would be doing on the other side, which is noting how useful and how legitimate international law is only in the specific instances in which it favors us, and noting how illegitimate or unuseful international law is when it does not favor us. In other words, the status of the right to return as refugees for ethnic Azeris who would want to return home to Nagorno-Karabakh. When we lose legitimacy when we decide that some essences of international law are legitimate and some others that are just as well established are not. So that's regarding the right to return. The same thing I would say for what are the legitimate elements of international law and how do we navigate within international law around the right of self-defense? Well, this Article 51 of the UN Charter, right of self-defense, it's sort of been bandied about. I mean, this is obviously coming from the narrative of Azerbaijan, and it's been picked up by a lot of international legal scholars. I would argue some really legitimate international legal scholars have argued that the initiation of the 2020 war was not an act of aggression by Azerbaijan, but instead falls under Article 51 self-defense because the Republic of Armenia was occupying, or as we like to call in international humanitarian law, we say a belligerent occupier of their sovereign territory for the last 30 years. This is not legitimate. This is a misunderstanding and mischaracterization of the region entirely. This also goes back to the point that is so important for us to remember, that no one has any idea what the map of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh actually look like, except for those in our region. And so if one map is put out by Azerbaijan and one map is put out by Armenia and the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, both are just as legitimate, frankly, in the eyes of the international community. We can't assume, we get stuck in a feedback loop where we feel that only our arguments are legitimate, and how could anybody see it any other way? But if I were to show you a map of Sudan, would you be able to argue with me that it was correct or incorrect? And how would you know?
Anna, can we take a question from the audience?
That was going to be exactly what I was going to suggest. Okay. So yes, please.
Thank you very much. Geram Stepanyan, Human Rights Ombudsman of the Republic of Artsakh. I just wanted to start just providing some details about the current president of Artsakh being legitimate or not. We should also consider that he was elected by the parliament of Artsakh, which was elected by the people of Artsakh, and according to the constitution of Artsakh, which was amended in 2023. And I mean, the circumstances under which these constitutional amendments were implemented is an issue of different discussion. I mean, but the fact that this person was elected by elected parliament is in place, and no one can say that Samvel Shahramanyan is not legitimate leader of Artsakh Republic. Okay. Okay, and the Constitutional Court of Artsakh stated that the constitutional amendments of 2023 were, sorry do not make political manipulations. We came from Artsakh and we undergone all the processes and emotions, not sitting in Yerevan, you know? We were there and we saw with our eyes what happened there. So, but coming to, I mean, I want you to be very clear that if we are speaking about the preservation of institutions, Samvel Armenian and other institutions of Artsakh, including human rights ombudsmen, have the legitimate right to exist. Now coming to the second part of our discussion, I mean, you were speaking about the preservation of institutions, and you said that in a cooperation with Armenia. And let's just quote the president of Parliament of Armenia, who said that the existence of state institutions of Artsakh are a threat to the national security of Armenia. It means that, and it is not classified information. I mean, they are speaking about us being a threat to the national security of Armenia very openly. So in these circumstances, what would be your advice for us? I mean, I think that there is not any room for cooperation on this issue, but personally, as an ombudsman, I want to preserve the institution of human rights defender, and I want to present and also to speak to the world about the right to return of Artsakh people. And we are really interested in preserving the state institution and sovereignty of Artsakh Republic. But what would be your advice in these circumstances? What we can do? What options do we have? And how to do in order not to threaten the Republic of Armenia or to change the position of the government of Armenia? Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to start by saying that. And also I want to go back to the question I asked Tallinn earlier, in which I asked her if state institutions of Artsakh, in Tallinn's view as an international law expert, pose any threat to the state institutions of Armenia. And I think her view was very, very clear that they do not, and that this is a mischaracterization of the international law. So Tallinn, if you could elaborate further, I'm sure you have many thoughts.
Geramjan, thank you very much for listening to this talk, and to you and everyone else in the audience. Let me just say, one of the reasons that it's painful for me to not be there is that I can't continue this conversation with you over a coffee, later today or tomorrow. But before I answer the question, let me just say heartfeltly that I want to continue this conversation with you. I want to think through these issues with you. And my pro bono human rights clinic is at the ready to assist you and provide any legal assistance that you need, including, by you, I mean also the Republic of Armenia. And we are interested in providing you with the support and expertise that you need to make some critical decisions. So at the outset, let me just take a privilege as a speaker and say that. Please reach out to me if you want to continue this conversation. But while we're here in this format, I will answer your question very, very simply in this way. There is no threat to the security of the Republic of Armenia by preserving institutions through mechanisms where those institutions of Artsakh are demonstrating their right to hold those institutions, the intent to preserve those institutions, and moreover, the intent to not abandon those institutions. Keep in mind that under international law, intent is really super important when we're talking about the elements of extinguishment of a state or preservation of a state. So practically speaking, sitting down in a room and going through what are the legitimate concerns of the leadership of the Republic of Armenia, how can you join them in addressing those legitimate concerns? And maybe this takes, and I don't mean this in a condescending way at all, but this happens for everyone. Maybe this requires a little bit of learning here, of learning of what the examples we have in history are, how Armenia can preserve its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security at all times. That's frankly the very first thing that we should all have as a priority, because as you sit there today, you are in fact in the Republic of Armenia. And so if the security of the Republic of Armenia were compromised in any way, it would frankly compromise you, your institution, the other former residents of the Republic of Artsakh, everyone around you that you know, and would create a humanitarian disaster for the fourth time in the last 3 years. So I know that you, by you, I mean former leadership of the Republic of Artsakh, also have a vested interest in the security of the Republic of Armenia, because you are living there and because you are ethnic Armenians as well. So we have to start from a place of mutual concern, hearing each other, and most importantly, not allowing for there to become an adversarial relationship. We have to sort of think about it this way: an adversarial relationship that gets out of hand between Artsakh leadership and the leadership of the Republic of Armenia is in no one's interest at all. It would compromise the security of the Republic of Armenia and therefore compromise your security and your institution's security. And it's not what you want. It's not what you want in the first place. So we have to function from a place where the Republic of Armenia is listening, and you, Republic of Artsakh leadership, are listening. And we have to go through the legitimate historical examples of how this can work, and go from there. Start with what the possible outcomes are and work ourselves backwards to figuring out what the next steps are. But the first step is make sure you are not showing an intent to abandon. I would say make sure right now, you can do that yourself. Make sure you are not demonstrating an intent to abandon your government institution. Okay.
I just want to, so before we get to the next question, I do want to make a request that because the subject matter that Tallinn is addressing so directly impacts the lives and security of people who were forced to flee the Republic of Artsakh, and I know there are several those people in the room, if at all possible, I would like to prioritize those questions to make sure that their concerns and their ability to take steps in the coming days, weeks, months are prioritized, and they have all the information they need. So Arajan, you're in the room. If we could just prioritize people who are from Artsakh, I think that would be the right way to go about this.
Can I make one brief point while you're gathering the next question?
Yes, sure.
I just wanted to make sure that I was addressing Gegab's point. Look, I'm very far from a scholar of the Constitution of the Republic of Artsakh. All I'm interested in is the continuity of the legitimate government of Artsakh in order to establish that continuity is has an intent to establish itself outside of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. So if you are telling me that Samvel Sharamanyan is the legitimate, democratically elected leader of the Republic of Artsakh, I have no interest in opposing that in any way. I take that at face value. If that is in fact the case, then I would say under international law, if you're going to establish the continuity of government, then he should be the government leader of a government in exile in order to continue the link of democratically elected leaders. And if some other day comes where a government in exile wants new leadership, then that new leadership would have to be elected democratically in line with the Karabakh constitution. So that's all I wanted to say. I have no interest in challenging the legitimacy of Samvel Sharamanyan in any way.
Tallinn, Anna, we do have a question. Պարոն Աշոտ, who is from Artsakh.
Աշոտ Սարգսյան, Ստեփանակերտից, Արցախի հանրապետության քաղաքացի։ Դուք նշեցիք արտաքսող կառավարության մասին, դա իհարկե Հայաստանի Հանրապետությանը վտանգ չի ներկայացնում, որտեղ այս պահի դրությամբ Արցախի հանրապետությունից Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում են գտնվում առնվազն 15,000 զինվորականներ, այդ թվում նաև կոնկրետ ես որպես նախկին Աշխարհազորի շտաբի պետ ես պատրաստ եմ Աշխարհազորը, որը հիմնականում 50%-ով այս պահի դրությամբ այստեղ են, մենք պատրաստ ենք, եթե պատերազմ լինի, պաշտպանելու Հայաստանի Հանրապետությանը։ Մենք հնարավոր չէ, որ Հայաստանի Հանրապետության անվտանգությանը սպառնանք, ընդհակառակը մենք պատրաստ ենք պաշտպանելու Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը։ Այնպես որ ինձ համար ճիշտ ասած շատ զարմանալի է, որ մանավանդ վերջին ժամանակներս արդեն հանրապետության վարչապետի այդ անհեթեթ արտահայտությունները նաև արտաբերել է հանրապետության նախագահը։ Ինձ համար որպես նախկին падգամավորի ոչ թե անհասկանալի, այլ նաև վիրավորական, որտեղ ես չեմ պատկերացնում ոնց կարող ենք մենք հայերս, Արցախի բնակչության հայերս վտանգ ներկայացնել Հայաստանի Հանրապետության։ Շնորհակալություն։
So it was a statement, not a question. So you can respond or you cannot respond.
Look, I mean, I'm going to make a really brief response, which is it is in no one's interest for there to start an adversarial relationship between the leadership of Artsakh and the leadership of the Republic of Armenia. It is the absolute best way to ensure that, one, we risk the security and sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia. Two, we ensure that no one returns to the Republic of Artsakh. Three, we ensure that the continuity of the elements of statehood of the Republic of Artsakh are not realized. And four, we ensure that no one will get reparations or compensation for their real and personal property at home in Artsakh. In my personal view, those are the absolute steps that will take place if we start an adversarial relationship between Armenia and the Republic of Artsakh. I would urge everyone to realize that it is not in your interest and to start focusing on positive steps you can take.
I have a question that was just sent in to me by somebody who was viewing and was having trouble using the chat. They were asking about from a lot of Artsaksis, there's a current slew of like bureaucratic and legal difficulties that they're facing because of their status in Armenia, and many of them, look to and we thought you could talk about what these passports are. Look to the Armenian passports that they have carried for a very long time, for the last 30 years. But the question is, because of these bureaucratic issues, many of them are leaving Armenia. They are facing very practical problems that are forcing people who have fled Artsakh to leave Armenia. How can how does that impact their ability to preserve the statehood of Artsakh if they're leaving Armenia, which you mentioned they could be anywhere, but does that impact their ability to preserve that? Does the dispersion of that community change their intent to the manifestation of their intent to continue their republic? And what suggestions are there for the Armenian government, the Armenian people, to be able to preserve their practical rights in Armenia while still not precluding their ability to preserve statehood?
So I'll start with the second question first, which is, I know that there was a lot of careful consideration and a series of options that were presented inside and outside of the Armenian government before taking the decision that they recently took to establish temporary protective status for the residents of Artsakh. I know that there was careful consideration that even though full citizenship to the Republic of Armenia was one of the options explored, there has been a lot of discussion that there may be a risk in granting that full citizenship, in sort of precluding the right to return home. For example, I would point out that the Convention on Stateless Persons, which Azerbaijan is a state party to that international convention, does establish that no state party is obligated to grant citizenship of its own country if that stateless person has already gotten citizenship or received citizenship of a third state, of a different nationality. And I bring that up just to point out that I think that the temporary protective status for now is the most legally sound and best way for us to continue down this road until we decide what further actions are going to be taken and what else to do. That preserves the right of return, that preserves it does not preclude, basically it does not show an intent to dissolve the Republic of Artsakh. Regarding the passports, I will just say a blanket statement that what we could all use more of is information and education. We could all use more information and education, and I would add dialogue, because the Republic of Armenia never granted full citizenship of Armenia to the residents of Artsakh. That never happened in history. The Republic of Armenia instead decided to grant passports to the residents of the Republic of Artsakh in order to allow them the permission to travel internationally. It was established under Armenian law at the time that the passports were dispersed that the citizens of Artsakh were given passports, but were not going to be recognized as citizens of Armenia. And frankly, this was a good decision because, again, if they had established the citizenship of everyone in Artsakh that they were citizens of Armenia, it would have shown an intent to dissolve Artsakh. And that's not what we wanted. We didn't want it then, and listening to Mr. Sapanyan, sounds like we don't want it now. And the other question regarding how to preserve their rights, it is my personal view that the temporary protective status is the best way to preserve the rights to hold the Republic of Artsakh in a state of government in exile or some other protectorate, as we say in international law, while also allowing them the ability to leave and move freely in and out of Armenia and other countries. And then last point I'll make, I just want to make sure I'm getting all of the points of the question regarding leaving Republic of Artsakh citizens actually leaving Armenia, maybe going to Russia and other places to live. Look, I from a very practical point of view, I can't say that I wouldn't do the same if I had family living somewhere else and I could feel safe and secure and reunited with my family. It is unimaginable the serious strife, stress, and trauma that people of Artsakh have been under recently, and obviously it should go without saying my heart goes out to all of you. I don't think we can fault or blame people for wanting to leave if they're going to see other family members, going to live with other family. Under international law, however, losing a defined population is definitely a risk, because keep in mind that defined population is one of the essential elements of statehood. And if we risk losing our defined population, that's losing one of the elements of statehood under the Montevideo Convention.
So maybe,
Alina?
oh yes.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so maybe in interacting with the Armenian government, it's important to emphasize the expansion of the practical rights given under temporary protected status to make sure that housing, food security, job security, these things are still guaranteed under TPS, to make sure that for the choice to stay or leave Armenia is really a choice, that the choice to stay is a real option for people in Artsakh, because if we want to preserve statehood, if the people of Artsakh want to preserve statehood, then staying is something that should be made a practical possibility, I think, as well.
Thank you.
You said there were two questions in the audience.
Yes, there is a question that someone's been very patient, and then one of our moderators from yesterday, Georg Melikian, he also has a question and would like to comment, because there's some clarifications that he'd like to ask or make. But first, I'm asked to let the question, and then we'll let Georg speak, and then you guys can respond in maybe a synthesized manner. Okay, thank you.
Ես Լիանա Մարտիրոսյանն եմ, սցենարիստ, իրավագետ եմ կրթությամբ։ Ուսումնասիրում եմ այս իրավիճակը ու ուզում եմ գտնել, թե ինչից սկսվեց այս խնդիրները, ինչից սկսվեցին։ Ես գնացի ուսումնասիրեցի Ալմաթի հռչակագիրը ու տեսա, որ դա թյուրիմացություն է պարզապես իմ կարծիքով։ Ես կուզեի ձեր կարծիքն էլ իմանալ Ալմաթի հռչակագրի մասին, 75 թվի քարտեզի մասին կուզեի իմանալ ու ընդհանրապես միջազգային իրավունքում դրանք ինչ ուժ ունեցող թղթեր են, բաներ են, ես չեմ հասկանում։ Ես ուսումնասիրել փորձեցի իրավական առումով, չհասկացա։ Հետո այս իրավական նիհիլիզմը մեր երկրում սկսվեց, ինձ թվում է, այդ հայտարարություններից հետո, առհասարակ Ալմաթի հռչակագիրը իմ այսպես ուսումնասիրություններից հետո պարզվեց, որ ուժը կորցրած ինչ-որ ստորագրություններով ինչ-որ բան է, Սովետական միության երկրների փլուզման ժամանակ, եւ հետո այդ դրա Ալմաթի հռչակագիրը այդքան էլ ուժ չունի, որքան Արցախի ինքնորոշման հռչակագիրը։ Ինձ թվում է, ես այսպես դնում եմ իրար կողք, նայում եմ, ասում եմ, այդ ժամանակ փլուզման ժամանակ ոնց կարող է Ալմաթի հռչակագիրը ավելի կարևոր համարել, քան Արցախի բնիկ ժողովրդի ինքնորոշման իրավունքը ու թույլ տալ, որ բռնատիրական ռեժիմ ունեցող Ադրբեջանը բավական չէ իր բնիկ ժողովրդի վրա է այդպիսի բռնատիրական գործողություններ կատարում, մի հատ էլ ավելացնեն Արցախի մեր բնիկ հայրենակիցների վրա, այսպես իրավունքներ ունենա։ Ես ուղղակի այսպես որպես սցենարիստ ուզում եմ բացահայտել այս միջազգային իրավունքում ինչպես են դրան նայում, ինչպես են նայում այդ թղթին, որը թուղթ չի, որը փաստաթուղթ չի, ուժ չունի Ալմաթի հռչակագիրը։ Ինչու ենք մենք անընդհատ բոլոր միջազգային ատյաններում, վայրերում ինչ-որ ելույթների ժամանակ խոսում Ալմաթի հռչակագիր, 75 թվի քարտեզ։ Արդյոք մեր տարածքային ամբողջականությունը Հայաստանի չի վտանգվում հենց այդ 75 թվի քարտեզ նշելով։ Շատ շնորհակալություն կներեք երկար խոսելու համար։
Thank you, Հարցումին, եւ հիմա կրնակ սպասել պատասխանելու Քևորգնա պիտի իր հարցումը դա եւ
շնորհակալություն բանախոսներին Տարենին եւ Աննային։ Քանի որ խոսվեց Ալմաթայի մասին, ես ասեմ, որ Ալմաթայի հռչակագիրը որևէ առնչություն չունի Արցախի հետ։ Եվ դա կեղծ նարատիվ է, որ հայկական տիրույթում մտավ վերջին ժամանակներում, որ իբր թե Ալմաթայի հռչակագիրը կարգավորում է նաև Հայաստանի եւ Ադրբեջանի հարաբերությունները Լեռնային Ղարաբաղի կամ Արցախի մասով, նման բան չկա, մեկը մյուսի հետ կապ չունի։ Ես ուղղակի կուզեմ քիչ ավելի բանով ասել, որտեվ որպեսզի շատ բան չլինի, որպեսզի նաև շատեր ավելի լավ հասկանան։
Anna Yeftalin, also please know that for the Armenian questions, I know that you both speak Armenian, but if you like, there is a translating function, so you could hear the question in English also in the comments in English, just in case, because I know our speakers are speaking quite quickly. So thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Ալմաթայի հռչակագիրը որևէ առնչություն չունի Արցախյան հիմնախնդրի հետ, առավել եւս որ այն թվականին, երբ ստորագրվեց այդ փաստաթուղթը, Արցախյան խնդիրը առանձնացավ։ Ավելին, Արցախի խնդիրը դրված էր առանձին այն իմաստով, որ Արցախը եւս կարող է միանալ այդ ժամանակ ստեղծում էր ԱՊՀ-ն։ Այս փաստաթուղթի մասին առաջին անգամ խոսել են ադրբեջանցիները 2015 թվականին եւ 2016-ին դրա մասին խոսել է ռուսական կողմը։ Որևէ մեկ անգամ Ալմատայի հռչակագիրը չի եղել կարգավորման ընդհանրապես որևէ հիմք, որևէ ժամանակահատված։ Դա մեկ։ Երկրորդը, փախստականների վերադարձի հարցը Թալին միշտ քննարկվել է եւ դրված է եղել, եւ պետք չի բացարձակացնել այդ հարցը, որ իբր թե մենք սխալ ենք արել եւ մենք չենք ներառել այդ հարցը եւ միայն խոսել ենք մեր շահերից, ոչ։ Մադրիդյան սկզբունքներում դրված է փախստականների հարցը, վերադարձի հարցը։ Դա երկու։ Երրորդը, անձնագրերը հանդիսանում են Հայաստանի Հանրապետության քաղաքացիության անձնագրեր։ Պետք չի մանիպուլացնել եւ խնդիրը իհարկե մեկնաբանության մեջ է։ Կարելի է տարբեր ձևերով մեկնաբանել։ Ես չգիտեմ ինչի հանկարծ մենք պիտի իրեն մեկնաբանենք Ադրբեջանի տեսանկյունից։ Դա եղել է եւ մնում է Հայաստանի Հանրապետության անձնագիրը։ Ավելին, Հայաստանի Հանրապետության անվտանգության ռազմավարության մեջ սևը սպիտակով նշված է, որ Հայաստանը հանդիսանում է Արցախի ժողովրդի անվտանգության երաշխավորը։ Հետևաբար պատասխանատվություն է կրում այդ մարդկանց համար։ Չորրորդը, խնդիրը այն չէ, թե Ադրբեջանը ինչ է ասում Արցախի հարցով։ Խնդիրն այն է, որ ինչպես ենք մենք պատկերացնում արցախցիների վերադարձը Արցախ, եթե խնդիրը չենք տեսնում իրենց այսինքն ադրբեջանական քաղաքացիություն տալով։ Այո, ադրբեջանական քաղաքացիություն, եթե նրանք վերցնեն, վաղվանից նրանք կարող են վերադառնալ Արցախ։ Սա է մեր ուզած, այսինքն երբ որ դուք խոսում եք այն մասին, որ նրանք պետք է վերադառնան, նրանք իրավունք ունեն վերադառնալու, ինչ կարգավիճակով են իրենք վերադառնալու, որպես Հայաստանի Հանրապետության քաղաքացիներ, թե որպես Ադրբեջանի Հանրապետության քաղաքացիներ։ Եթե այս հարցին կարող եք պատասխանել, մենք կարող ենք քննարկել, թե իրենք ինչպես են վերադառնալու, որովհետև Ադրբեջանը խոչընդոտ է տեսնում այստեղ։ Նա չի ճանաչում եւ 5-րդ կետը, խնդիրը ինքնորոշումը չի, խնդիրը ինքնապաշտպանությունն է, որովհետև 88 թվականից սկսած Արցախը եւ նաեւ հայությունը, ինչպես ժամանակին Նախիջևանի պարագայում, ենթարկվել է հարձակումների Բաքվում եւ Սումգայիթում։ Խնդիրը ինքնորոշումը չէ միայն։ Հետևաբար ինչպես ենք մենք անելու, որպեսզի պաշտպանենք այդ մարդկանց իրավունքները Արցախում։ Իսկ եթե մենք մոռանում ենք ընդհանրապես Արցախը, ինչպես իշխանությունն է փորձում անել եւ ազգային ժողովի խոսնակը հայտարարեց, որ Արցախյան խնդիրը այլևս գոյություն չունի, Հայաստանը կապ չունի ստեղծության Արցախի հետ։ Ինչպես եք պատկերացնում եւ ով պետք է պաշտպանի այդ մարդկանց իրավունքները վերադարձի, եթե Հայաստանը ինքը հրաժարվում է դա անել։ Շնորհակալություն։
I think maybe I can synthesize these into a question that Tallene, perhaps you could comment on. First, okay.
Yeah, just to say really quickly that it's really difficult to hear the English language interpretation. So I just wanted to point that out to you.
That maybe tells me a little bit about what the audience members are also hearing. I'm debating if I should speak in Armenian or English to answer this question, to synthesize the question. So the last speaker,
if you could speak in English, that would be preferable since the interpretation was difficult to hear.
So the last speaker mentioned that two things. One, that the question of the right of return of Azerbaijanis has always been on the table. Two, that I'm not following the same numbering. That Armenia, in its laws, presents itself as a security guarantor of Artsakh, and so does owe these citizens something. And he also mentioned that the passports that Tallene, you were describing as travel documents, are guarantees of Armenian citizenship. I think and then the last portion was about how we conceive of the rights of the people of Artsakh. Either they have a right to return as Azerbaijani citizens, or we conceive of their rights as people with the right to self-determination. And on that point, I think that maybe it was poorly heard, because I think we agree. Tallinn and almost me are lawyers. And so we're looking at this from what options are available, and those are among the options. I think we'd all agree that they are not the ones we want to choose. But if we want to not take those options, if we do not want for people to return as unsafe and discriminated citizens of Azerbaijan, then we have steps that we need to take. There are things that need to be done. And this conversation, I think, focused largely on what do we need to do to ensure these things. There are actions that we have to take. So Tallinn, if maybe you could clarify, or if maybe you could comment on the status of these passports. Did they or did they not guarantee citizenship? Maybe there's a debate, maybe there's a legal debate on that. And two, what does the state of Armenia owe to the people of Artsakh? Because there's obviously a tension. I think we can all acknowledge there's a tension. And in order to alleviate that, maybe we have to talk about what are the responsibilities that the state of Armenia does owe? How do we advocate for those? And what do the people of Artsakh have to guarantee for themselves in terms of establishing their own government, I guess?
And if Tallinn, I may, this is almost opening a whole other new extension of the discussion, to be honest. So just a few quick thoughts, and I think we're going to have to agree to reconvene and have additional examination of these issues. This was an hour and 15 minutes allocation, so no one expects of the panelists that they are going to be able to examine all these issues to the degree that both the audience would like to hear and would be satisfied with. So with that, I would just ask you to be very brief and just give a couple thoughts, and I think we're going to have to reconvene. And we'll do so shortly. I don't mean today, but in a short period of time moving forward. Thank you.
Sure, very good. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate the tension in the room, and I will be as brief as possible to simply say that I'm not an Armenian lawyer, and I'm not versed in the laws of Armenia, and I'm not versed in the laws of the Republic of Artsakh. I'm an international lawyer, and my interest is to tell you what your options are as legal tools under international law. Therefore, I have no stance except for what I've been told by Armenian government officials and what I have understood for years about what that passport that was given to residents of Artsakh does and does not do. It's been discussed several times by Armenian lawyers that I've heard personally that it does not grant citizenship. If it does, then I'm wrong. I'm not an Armenian attorney, so I have no stake in this. Let me just conclude extremely briefly by saying that a choice is going to need to be made sooner rather than later on whether Artsakh residents are returning. If that choice is made to not return, then you need to make that choice soon, because if you don't return, then you need to at least secure compensation through reparations and restitution through what I would call probably an international claims commission for all of your real and personal property. You have to put that on the table as an option here, okay? A claims commission is an option here. And I think it would be a disservice to the people of Artsakh if you didn't at least explore the possibility of compensation for all of your lost property here. Obviously, there's also the right to return, which you will never lose. Your right to self-determination, which you will never lose. It is established under international law, and you cannot lose it, frankly. And a decision is going to have to be made, but keep the conversation going, please, and try to keep an open mind. This infighting doesn't serve anyone. And I'll just stop. I'll stop there. But suffice it to say, I welcome everyone to continue the conversation with me. Please reach out to me. I'd be happy to be of service in any way I can.
Thank you. Anna?
I think with that, maybe we should conclude our panel. There's just a lot to talk about when it comes to international law, but I think maybe a good way to summarize is to say that there are options on the table. Some aspects of different aspects of international law support these different options, but we have to make choices about what we want. And the people of Artsakh have to be given the agency to make the choices about what they want, and we should be able to support them and know what the tools are to be able to support whatever choices they choose to walk away with. And we should know what the tools are that are available to us and which tools don't help us. And so I think this conversation was a start to exploring that. And in the next couple of weeks, that information needs to be disseminated much more widely. But I'm really grateful to the audience. I'm especially grateful to the organizers and most grateful to the people of Artsakh who chose to be in this room and have this conversation right now in the middle of all of their trauma, in the middle of trying to rebuild their lives and also think about rebuilding their country. That's incredible, admirable, and something I think we should all aspire to. So thank you so much to everyone who's here.
Thank you, Anna. And I'm sort of flip-flop. There was one question with the alma mater agreement.
After I just said that, okay.
It was asked, but the alma mater, does it carry any international weight? What is the legal significance under international law of the alma mater understanding treaty?
Yeah, so a 2-second answer is the Alma Ata, the protocol. Well, we call it the protocol in English. I don't know if that's just an American English term, but the Alma Ata protocol establishes the Commonwealth of Independent States. It establishes the Commonwealth of Independent States. So it does have weight under international law. It was not signed by all of the Soviet republics, but after it was signed, everyone agreed to become an independent state, and they did in fact become an independent state. So it does have legal effect under international law as the instrument that established the Commonwealth of Independent States. That's it.
Thank you. And our next panelist does have a one quick comment.
Very brief comments. We have serious problem in this issue of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh problems. Therefore, we need in task force probably because we have problem with natures, with philosophy, with principles, political issue of the problem dimensions. In our brief discussion today, I see that all these problems, we have seen meal calculation, meal interpretation of these processes. If you're trying to continue our struggle, we need in task force where we're starting to discuss this problem because this problem cannot be discussed in these large panel discussions. In your speech, in your discussion, I see very serious problems. We must discuss this, not in this wide problem. If you don't, Gurgen Melikian, etc., scientists who are working in this field during dozens of years, I'm working with Nagorno-Karabakh problem more than 25 years. We can start this work. It is very long gestation. It is long will and long gestation. Thank you.
Thank you, Racha. And I don't think Tallinn or Anna would disagree. This is a point of discussing certain aspects of perpetuating statehood, if that is what is requested, that is what is desired, and some of the elements involved. But no one would say that. But I would say that there is a role for these types of open discussions. Yes, there is a role as well, and of course there is work to be done within task forces, and also work to be done within the probably within the work of the Artsakh government as well. So, but thank you, Tallinn, thank you, Anna. Everyone, we will reconvene in 1.5 hours. Please enjoy yourself, the hospitality, sandwiches, which I think we need, and we'll be closing with Haracha and Glenn Grant. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Still good morning to you, and hope you have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We are ready, Glenn. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for our final discussion with Dr. Hirachi Arzumanyan and Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant. Thank you, and thank you.
Բարի երեկո, մենք կսկսենք երևի, ես հայերեն կխոսեմ։ 2020 թվականի երկրորդ Արցախյան պատերազմից հետո դա եղավ կատաստրոֆիկ Հայաստանի համար եւ հարց առաջացավ, որ պիտի գնահատական տաս ինչ է տեղի ունեցել։ Եվ հիմնական խնդրը, որի առջև կանգնացեք, փաստորեն պարզվեց, որ 20 տարվա ընթացքում Հայաստանը պատրաստվում է մի պատերազմի, որը տեղի չունեցավ։ Հիմնական ռազմավարական խնդիրը եւ խնդրը Հայաստանի համար եղավ, որ ինքը պատրաստվում է ուրիշ պատերազմի։ Հայաստանը չի պատրաստվում, ինքը պատրաստվում է փոքր պատերազմի, լոկալ պատերազմի Ադրբեջանի հետ, ում հետ ինքը ունի համապատասխան ներուժ, ռազմական ներուժ եւ հետ իրեն կարող է տանել պատերազմ։ Բայց 2020 թվականի Հայաստանը փաստորեն գտնվեց մի պատերազմում, որտեղ ինքը ստիպված էր դիմակայի ուժային կենտրոնների Ռուսաստանի, Թուրքիայի ռազմական բլոկին, որին օգնում է Պակիստանը, օգնում է իսլամական ջիհադիզմը։ Ըստ Հայաստանը անսպասելի համար մտավ տարածաշրջանային պատերազմի մեջ, որ ուներ լոկալ պատերազմի ձև, բայց բնույթով եղել է տարածաշրջանային։ Եվ այդ ժամանակ պատասվեց, որ Հայաստանի ռազմական եւ անվտանգության համակարգը չի պատրաստվում նման պատերազմներին։ Եվ հարց առաջացավ, արդյոք Հայաստանը լինելով ոչ մեծ երկիր, կարող է ունենալ անվտանգության եւ պաշտպանության համակարգ, որը կկարողանա դիմադրել ուժային կենտրոններին։ Արդյոք Հայաստանը կարող է դիմադրել Թուրքիային, այդ լուծելի խնդիրը թե չէ։ Փառք Աստծո պարզվեց, որ այդ խնդիրը լուծում ունի եւ կա շատ երկրներ, որ այդ ճանապարհով գնացել են եւ կառուցել են անվտանգության եւ պաշտպանության համակարգ, որոնք կարողանում են չեզոքացնել կամ դիմադրել ոչ համեմատելի ավելի մեծ, ավելի հզոր երկրների ուժային կենտրոններին։ Նման լուծումները տեղի են ունեցել, սկսել են լայն զարգանալ երկրորդ համաշխարհային պատերազմից հետո, Total Defense հասկացողություն կոնցեպտի ներքո, որը Շվեդիան, Ֆինլանդիան եւ երկրները զարգացնում են։ 60 թվականներից Total խոսքը փոխվեց փաստորեն համապարփակ խոսքով, comprehensive հասկացողությունով, ելնելով նրանից, որ Total հասկացողությունը կոնցեպտը ուներ ոչ դրական կոնոտացիաներ եւ բացի դրանից պարզվեց, որ դու չես կարող սահմանափակվել միայն պաշտպանությունով։ Դու ստիպված ես մտածել անվտանգության մասին եւ որովհետեւ պատերազմը ավելի լայն է, քան թե զույգ ռազմական գործողությունները։ Ուստի ձևավորվեց համապարփակ պաշտպանության մոտեցումը անվտանգության կառուցման մեջ, որը հնարավորություն է տալիս պետության եւ ժողովրդին կառուցել համակարգ, որը հնարավորություն է տալիս լուծել խնդիրները։ Եթե մտածեք յուրահատկությունը այդ մոտեցման որն է, դա բավականին պարզ մոտեցում է։ Դա այդ մոտեցումը խոսում է նրա մասին, երբ դու ստիպված ես դիմադրել անհամապատասխան ուժային կենտրոնին, դու այդ խնդիրը կարող ես լուծել, եթե դու այդ աշխատանքի մեջ, այդ գործողության մեջ ընկալում ես ողջ հասարակության, ողջ ժողովրդի ներուժը։ Պետությունը, պետական մարմինները ժողովրդի ներուժի ընդամենը 2-3% են կազմում։ 2-3%-ը միայն պետությունը չի կարող դիմադրի ուժային կենտրոնին, բայց եթե դու այդ աշխատանքի մեջ ներուժը մտցնում ես ողջ ժողովուրդը, մտցնում ես ողջ հասարակությունը եւ կառուցում ես մի համակարգ, որի մեջ ամեն մեկը իրան տեղը գիտի եւ ֆունկցիաներ ունի, այդ խնդիրը դառնում է լուծում։ Դու այդ լուծումը կարող ես ունենալ։ Եվ կա բավականին շատ երկրներ, որ այդ ճանապարհով կարողացել են կառուցել իրենց համակարգերը։ Դա Ֆինլանդիան է, Շվեդիան է, Նորվեգիան է, Թայվանն է, Սինգապուրն է, Իսրայելն է եւ այլ եւ այլ։ Ուստի հիմնական մոտեցումը դու կարող ես այդ խնդիրները լուծես, եթե փոխում ես քո ֆիլոսոֆիան, փոխում ես այն սկզբունքները, որի վրա դու կառուցում ես քո անվտանգությունը։ Եվ հիմնական մոտեցումը այդ խնդիրը կարող լուծված լինել միայն ողջ ժողովրդի ներուժի ընկալման։ 2014 թվականին կարելի ասել, երբ Ռուսաստանը ագրեսիան սկսեց, լայնածավալ ագրեսիան սկսեց Քրիմի օկուպացիայից հետո, ՆԱՏՕ-ի կոնցեպտուալ մտածող համակարգերը, establishment-ը մտածեց, որ հասկացել են, որ Ռուսաստանը փոխում է իր մոտեցումը, ասում է ռևիզիոնիստ քաղաքականության եւ վերականգնում է կայսրությունը։ Երբ ես ծնվեց հասկացողություն, որ պետք է պատրաստել հետսովետական երկրները Ամանավանդ նման պատերազմի եւ ՆԱՏՕ-ի ընթացքում, արևմտյան երկրների ընթացքում սկսեցին զարգացնել համապարփակ մոտեցման սկզբունքները եւ կոնցեպտը, որ օգնեն հետսովետական երկրների այդ գաղափարը իրականացնել։ Եվ փաստորեն 2020 թվականին կարելի ասել այդ գաղափարները արդեն ձևավորված էին եւ ուստի Հայաստանը հնարավորություն ունի ոչ թե զրոյից կառուցելման համակարգեր, բայց վերցնել, ասենք, ՆԱՏՕ-ի կողմից մշակված կոնցեպտուալ դոկումենտները, Ֆինլանդիայի փորձը, արևմտյան մնաց երկրների փորձը եւ ադապտացնել դա Հայաստանին։ Որովհետև համապարփակ անվտանգության մոտեցումների սկզբունքներից մեկը այն է, որ նման համակարգերը դու չես կարող կոպի-պաստով վերցնես մեխանիկորեն տեղափոխես մի երկրից երկրորդ երկիրը։ Նման համակարգերը հիմնվում են երկրի մշակույթի վրա, անցած ճանապարհի վրա, ավանդույթի վրա, եւ ուստի այդ խնդիրները դու կարող ես լուծել միայն մնալով Հայաստանի ներքո եւ Հայաստանում։ Բայց այդ խնդիրը լուծելի է եւ այդ գաղափարները փաստորեն Հայաստանում ձևավորվել են հասարակության փորձագետների, գիտնականների մոտ 2020-2021 թվականին որպես պատասխան այդ գաղափարները սկզբունքները սկսել են ձևավորվել եւ սկսել են ձևավորվել հասարակության մեջ։ Դա մի քիչ յուրահատուկ է իհարկե։ Եվ այդտեղ այդ գաղափարի մեջ իհարկե մեծ դեր խաղում պահեստազորային համակարգը եւ ուժերը։ Ինչու՞, որովհետև պահեստազորային համակարգը յուրահատուկ է, որովհետև մի կողմից դա հասարակության մեջ է, դա հասարակության կյանքի մեջ է ձևավորում, մյուս կողմից դա ռազմական անվտանգության ինստիտուտներից մեկն է։ Պահեստազորային ուժերը դա յուրահատուկ է դրանց ֆունկցիաները ընկալում իրար մեջ այդ ողջ աշխատանքները։ Դրա համար հասկանալի է եղել, որ պահեստազորային ուժերը եւ պահեստազորային սկզբունքները համակարգը Հայաստանում պիտի փոխվի։ Եվ պիտի փոխվի ողջ համակարգը, բայց նաեւ պիտի փոխվի պահեստազորային համակարգը Հայաստանին, որը պիտի դառնա ավելի լայն, ավելի խոր հասկացողություններով եւ պատրաստ լինի ապահովի համապարփակ անվտանգության պաշտպանության համակարգը, որը պիտի ձևավորվի։ Դրա համար, եթե մինչև այդ սովետական համակարգի ներքո, եթե պահեստազորային ուժերը, պահեստազորային համակարգի խնդիրն է ապահովել համալրման պահեստազոր, որը պիտի լրացնի կոնվենցիոնալ ուժերը, այս նոր մոտեցման սկզբունքում պահեստազորային համակարգը ավելի լայն է ստացվում։ Դու պիտի ունենաս ոչ թե միայն համալրման պահեստազորային հնարավորություններ, բայց ավելի լայն համակարգ։ Հայկական իրականության մեջ բացի համալրման համակարգից դու պիտի պատրաստ ես ունենալ ակտիվ ռեզերվը, այն ուժերը, որը պատրաստ են մտնել պատերազմի մեջ անմիջապես հետո, բացի դրանից դու պատրաստես ողջ հասարակությունը որպես պահեստազորային համակարգի մաս, եւ պիտի ունենաս նաեւ ռազմավարական պահեստազոր, ռազմավարական ռեզերվ համակարգ։ Դա նշանակում է, որ քո համակարգը ավելի բարդ է դարձնում, քան թե կա այսօր։ Եվ այդտեղ ձևավորել այդ նման մոտեցումները փաստորեն ստացվում է դու պիտի սկսես կառուցել նոր համակարգ, որը ավելի բարդ է, ավելի յուրահատկությունները շատ են, եւ դա բավականին դժվար խնդիր է։ Ինչու է դժվարությունը, այդ մի կողմն է դժվարությունները, որը կախված է քո կոնվենցիոնալ բանակից, բացի ունենալով կոնվենցիոնալ բանակ, դու ստիպված ես լայնացնել հասկացողությունը եւ քո ռազմական կազմակերպության մեջ, ռազմական ուժերի կազմակերպությունների մեջ, բացի կոնվենցիոնալ բանակից, դու ստիպված ես մտցնել ավելի պահեստազորային ուժեր։ Եթե դու ստիպված ես, եթե դու պիտի պատրաստվես դիմադրել Թուրքիային, 80 միլիոնոց Թուրքիայի բանակին, միայն կոնվենցիոնալ բանակը 50-60 հազարանոց բանակը չի կարող լուծել այդ խնդիրը։ Դու պիտի լայնացնես քո ուժային հնարավորությունները եւ պատրաստ լինես լրացնես կոնվենցիոնալ քո բանակը պահեստազորային բատալյոններով, բրիգադաներով, որը այդ պատերազմի ժամանակ պատրաստ են լինում լրացնել կոնվենցիոնալ բանակը եւ լուծել խնդիրներ, ռազմական խնդիրներ կոնվենցիոնալ բանակի հետ։ Դա նշանակում է, որ քո համակարգը պլանավորումը ռազմական դառնում է ավելի բարդ եւ իրար մեջ մտցնում է եւ կոնվենցիոնալ բանակը, եւ պայստային ուժերը, եւ տարածքային պաշտպանության ուժերը եւ համակարգը։ Դա յուրահատուկ ուրիշ մոտեցում է, որը անպայման պիտի տեղի ունենա, եւ պայստազորային ուժերը, տարածքային պաշտպանության ուժերը ընդհանուր համակարգի մեջ պիտի ձևավորված լինեն։ Կարելի է ասել, որ Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունում նման աշխատանքները արդեն սկսվեցան եւ 2021 թվականից հետո հայկական ռազմական ուժերում արդեն ձևավորված էր հրամանատարություն, պայեստային ուժերի եւ տարածքային պաշտպանության ուժերի հրամանատարություն, որը վերցրել է իր վրա այդ process-ները սինխրոնիզացման եւ կառուցման։ Հայաստանում այդ հարցը արդեն կամաց-կամաց ձևավորվում է եւ հիմա փաստորեն ձևավորում է կոնցեպտը, մոտեցումները, ոնց պայեստային ուժերը եւ տարածքային ուժերը պիտի համընկնեն միասին կոնվենցիոնալ ուժերի հետ եւ մնացած ուժերի հետ պիտի ձևավորեն Հայաստանի պաշտպանությունը, ընդհանուր պաշտպանության պլանի մեջ իհարկե։ Ինչ կարելի է այսօր ասել։ Կարելի է ասել այսօր հստակ, որ պայեստային ուժերը Հայաստանում, բացի ռազմական խնդիրներից, կունենան նոր յուրահատկություններ, որը կախված են ռազմական գործողությունների փոխվող ֆորմաների ու բնույթի հետ, որովհետև այսօրվա ռազմական գործողությունները ընկալում են իրենց ոչ միայն տրադիցիոն ավանդական ռազմական գործողությունները, բայց նաև ընկալում են իրար մեջ cyber security, cyber գործողություններ, տեղեկատվական գործողություններ, ռազմական գործողություններ եւ այլ, բայց նման ունակությունները, նման հնարավորությունները ավանդական բանակում եւ անձնական ռազմական ուժերում բավականին լավ չեն զարգացած եւ հասարակությունը ավելի շատ հնարավորություն ունի մասնակցել նման գործողությունների մեջ։ Ուստի պայեստային ուժերը Հայաստանում եւ ոչ թե միայն Հայաստանում ունեն յուրահատուկ յուրահատուկ ստորաբաժանումներ, որը զբաղվում են նոր ռազմական գործողությունների ձևերով, cyber ռազմական գործողություններով, տեղեկատվական գործողություններով եւ նման ուժերի կառուցման ժամանակ հասարակության ներուժի օգտագործումը դառնում է բավականին անհրաժեշտ։ Դա խնդրեմ միայն Հայաստանի խնդրը չի։ Եվ պետք է հասկանալ, որ բոլոր խնդիրները, բոլոր երկրներում այդ խնդրը կա։ Դու ստիպված ես ներգրավել քո ռազմական գործողությունների մեջ ավելի լայն մասշտաբներով քո հասարակությունը, ողջ քո հասարակության ներուժը եւ դու չես կարողանում այսօրվա արդիական ռազմական գործողությունների անհրաժեշտությունները պահել միայն բանակի շուրջ, բանակի ներքո։ Դու ստիպված ես բացվել, դու ստիպված ես օգտագործել եւ հիմնես քո պաշտպանության համակարգը whole societal approach-ի մեջ, հայերեն չգիտեմ ոնց կլինի, whole governmental approach-ից բացի դու պիտի անցնես whole society approach եւ ողջ հասարակության ներուժը մտնում է պաշտպանության համակարգի մեջ։ Դու պիտի գտնես տեղը եւ դերը ողջ հասարակության։ Ամեն մեկը պիտի իրան տեղը ունենա խաղաղ ժամանակ, ճգնաժամի ժամանակ, նախապատերազմական եւ պատերազմական ժամանակներում։ Ուստի համապարփակ մոտեցումը եւ համապարփակ պաշտպանության եւ անվտանգության համակարգը պարտադրում է, որ դու կարողանաս կազմես եւ ձևավորես նոր դաշինք պետության, ռազմական ուժերի հետ եւ հասարակության հետ։ Եվ հասարակությունը եւ պետությունը պիտի համաձայնվեն, որ իրանք ուրիշ ձև են կազմակերպում իրենց հարաբերությունները, եթե ուզում են փրկեն հայկական պետականությունը։ Դու պիտի նորից դաշինք կմպես, որտեղ եւ հասարակության դերը եւ ներգրավումն է փոխվում, եւ պետության դերը եւ բացումն է փոխվում, եւ պետությունը պիտի փոխվի, դառնա ավելի բաց եւ ընդունի, որ հասարակությունը մտնում է նման աշխատանքների եւ հասարակությունը պիտի պատրաստ լինի մտնի նման աշխատանքների մեջ։ Այստեղ փոխում է ֆիլոսոֆիան, ոնց է դու ձևավորում քո պետականությունը, պետականության մարմինները եւ հասարակության հետ ներգրավումը եւ փոխհարաբերությունները։ Եվ նման աշխատանքները ավելի հեշտ է սկսել, նորից եմ կրկնում վերջացնելով, պայեստային համակարգի ձևավորման մեջ, որովհետեւ պայեստային համակարգը ի սկզբանե իր մեջ ներգրավում է եւ հասարակությունը, եւ պետական մարմինները, եւ սկսելով այստեղ այդ տրանսֆորմացիան, որը վերջում ընկալում է ողջ պետական մարմինները, ողջ ռազմական համակարգը, մենք կարող ենք հասնել հաջողության, բայց առաջի քայլերը ավելի հեշտ է սկսել պայեստային համակարգի փոփոխությունների մեջ, որտեղ դու քայլ առ քայլ սկսում ես փոխել քո պահեստային համակարգը, ոնց է հարաբերությունները ձևավորվում եւ այդ ճանապարհով հասնում համապարփակ անվտանգության եւ պաշտպանության համակարգի Հայաստանում։ Շնորհակալություն։
Thank you very much. I'm going to add a few things and maybe argue against a few things, not not suggesting that those things necessarily are right or wrong, but just to try and highlight the complexity of what you, in some areas of what you've been talking about. I think there is a danger always when people talk about comprehensive approach of everybody not actually knowing what it means. Please do not ask me for a definition. I have no idea, because I've been hearing the words comprehensive approach from so many people in so many countries, and they're all different. And they all think it means something different. So if you're going to talk about comprehensive approach, for you, you need to have a clear definition. What does that definition mean? And then what are the second and third order decisions and thoughts that come out of the first order analysis of what is comprehensive approach? So no, I'm not going to say yes. You say yes, of course, but of course you have a grasp of what it is, but nobody else in the room does, and that's why it's quite challenging. I mean, it's not bad. It's just a challenge to get a common viewpoint of what we're talking about. So that's my first point: is how do we, because I'm here as well, how do we get a common viewpoint on what is a comprehensive approach? Now, Latvia says it's got a comprehensive approach. And if you talk to the minister, he says, we've got a comprehensive approach for defense. It means nothing. It's garbage. It's just something that's written on paper. And if you go to a county, or you go to a firm that does drones or something and say, are you part of the comprehensive approach? They'll just say, what? Because society has not been involved in the comprehensive approach. It was written by the Defense Ministry. And if the Defense Ministry writes comprehensive approach, it is meaningless to you. It's meaningless. It's MOD's words and vision of something, but nobody else knows what it is. I might add that, I live in Latvia, people, but nobody ever asked me whether I'm willing to be involved in defense of Latvia. So it's not pretty much not comprehensive, because I'm the most experienced person in the whole country on defense, but I'm not involved in it. Mm-hmm. So it's as uncomprehensive as that, as comprehensive as that. So the only people really who talk about comprehensive approach are people who really don't actually understand what it is or think they do. Whatever system that you choose, must have the right incentives. And incentives can be money, they can be anything. And if you go to Finland, Finland has got a pretty comprehensive approach, and their incentives, all their reserve officers get promoted. The big incentive is that if you do conscription, you are seen as having passed as a citizen. Companies and people treat people who have done conscription in Finland with respect. Not that they are losing society for 2 years, but that 2 years is the joining of society. It's really important, and it's really clever, because, senior people go, I'll give you an example. How clever this is that last month in the snow, the first snows in Finland, the president went on exercise with the boys, with the prime minister. And not only did they go on exercise with the boys, they slept in the tent with the boys. And the president did guard duty from 3 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the morning. Now beat that for an incentive for soldiers to believe that they are joining the society in big time. You can't. Nothing beats being in a tent, sleeping with the president, and the president gets up at 3 o'clock and does an hour guard duty. It's impossible to beat something like that. And that is how Finland, the incentive is a moral incentive that is so powerful that girls want to do conscription. So 2 points about whatever system you choose. What is not seen degrades. So if it's only on paper, from the moment it's on paper and people cannot see it visually, you can't see it visually, you can't see it visually, it starts to go downhill. Because you can only, if you can see things, you can check them. Hey, this is good. If you can't see it, it's like student bars. You know, if you don't go there for 6 months, when you go back next time, it's closed. It's because it's not seen, it degrades, it's gone. The second point is that what is not practiced doesn't work in war. If you don't practice it regularly, when you come to use it, it's not there because it's degrade, so it doesn't work. You cannot expect things on paper to work in wartime. So no matter how comprehensive your comprehensive approach is, no matter what clever things you put in place, without practicing and exercising regularly, they just ain't there when you need them. Remember that. My view, my feeling is that you in society here in your country need to practice or to be involved in those things that are real for the military. Those things where there is real need, medical training. There is no way that the military system can train all the conscripts properly to the required standard, but you can organize it so that there is a system to help the military train it. And if you do that, I promise you that they will start to get enthusiastic, because once they've seen you can do it in one area that's important, they'll believe you can do it in another area. So I think that focus on those areas of need. Ukraine says medical is probably one of the most serious aspects of the war, because people are not being trained properly, and this thing they call the golden hour is failing time and time again. Why is it failing? Nobody's trained to look after the person. Nobody knows how to put the tourniquet on properly and take it off, put it on, take it off, put it on, so the blood keeps flowing enough to keep life in the arm, life in the leg, or whatever. And if they just put a tourniquet on and lock it, 6 hours later, you have to cut the leg off. That is really important. So the things like that are where you in society can be involved, and where in Ukraine society is really involved in trying to raise the standards of those things beyond the standard the military are doing. So that I think that's important. Focus on real things. And there needs to be a one army approach. And that doesn't exist at the moment. If you have a civilian army and a military army, there will be a break. So somehow everything has to be within the military, even if you're, outside of it. But you know this, but I'm just pointing this out. You cannot have separate organizations outside of the military. Somehow they have to be put together in a clever way, using every tool, social media tool that you can do to make things work, whether it's names, whether you create web pages for 6 Battalion support group, something like that. Then 6 Battalion knows who you are. You've got your names on the web page, and they know that you are the girls who are going to make sure that they're trained in this, they get that. If there's a problem, you're going to take them to hospital and make sure they've got clothes when they're in hospital. Doesn't matter what it is, but it's real. And there is also this other challenge with comprehensive approach. Thank you. Which is, that's my last of my, no, it doesn't matter. That's who manages society. This is actually another challenge. You've got to manage yourself because you do not. This is a democracy. You do not wish government to manage you. Now, if you then look at Ukraine, what you see for the support in Ukraine is total and utter chaos on the surface. To government, it's chaos. To the wives of soldiers on the front line, it's not chaos because they're supporting husband. So it's direct link. Girl is supporting husband. Girl raises money brilliantly in some cases. I mean, some of the women are producing. They're making so much, getting so much money. It frightens me. I mean, I want 117,000 euros for drones, and they're managing to collect it from diaspora, from companies in like 5 days. Huge amounts. And some of the NGOs are collecting $250,000 euros in about 2 weeks. That's monstrous. And they're buying long-range drones and things like this with the money, or thousands, and I mean thousands, of medical kits for soldiers. So there's some really brilliant pictures on Facebook from some of the Ukrainian NGOs. You should look at them. So I would just come to this one last point, which take in, is that government cannot control society. It can't control society. It cannot totally control society. And in a democracy, it just no way it can. Because unless it produces draconian laws of the Stalin type, it's never actually going to be able to focus on what you're doing. So you've actually, the volunteer ethos is much, much stronger than any government when you want it to be so, much stronger. So I'm fairly sure, having looked around the room at the most stubborn people here who've stayed to the end, thank you, all of you, for staying to the end, that you are much stronger than any government ever will be, all of you. Because if you've survived 2 days of me, you must be very strong. And on that note, sir, I shall finish. Thank you.
Question.
Yeah, you'll have one question.
Ես կարող եմ կոմենտ անեմ կամ հա։ Կոմենտներ, հա, շնորհակալություն, շատ հետաքրքիր է, հա։ Առաջինը, Փառք Աստծո, երևի կարող եմ այդ ասեմ, համապարփակ մոտեցումը Հայաստանում սկսել է զարգանալ հասարակությունից։ Ներքևից վերև process է, то есть հասարակությունն է հասկացել 2020 թվականից, որ ելք չկա, դու պիտի պատրաստվես, եւ process-ը սկսվել է ներքևից, բայց մի տարուց հետո մոտորապես եւ հասարակությունը ցույց է տվել նաեւ իշխանությունին եւ պետության, որ դա արդյունավետ ճանապարհ է, հասարակություն, Facebook, social ցանցերով եւ այլը, բացի դրանից անց է կացրել զորավարժություն իր սեփական ուժերով, ցույց տալով, որ դա հնարավոր է, կարելի է վերցնել սովորական պահեստազորային տղային եւ 10 օրվա ընթացքում պատրաստել, որ ինքը պատրաստ լինի բատալյոնում հիմնական տաքսիկական եւ քարակային վարժությունները անցկացնել միասին գնալ պատերազմ, սկզբնական, դա հնարավոր է, դա լուծելի խնդիր է։ Մենք տեսել ենք եւ 80% առաջի անգամ հակած ռազմական զգեստ 15 օրից հետո արդեն կարողանում են հիմնական խնդիրները լուծել։ Հասարակությունը ցույց է տվել, որ հասարակությունը ժողովուրդը պատրաստ է դրան գնալ։ Եվ պետությունը տեսավ, որ այդ հնարավոր է, վերևից սկսվեց յուրիշ process, վերևից ներքև սկսեց process ձևավորել համապարփակ հասկացողությունը Հայաստանում։ Այդ ոնց կլինի։ Եվ ես իմ զեկույցում ասել եմ, որ հասկանալի է, որ համապարփակը յուրահատուկ է ամեն երկրի համար, դու չես կարող կոպի-պաստով բերես տեղ։ Եվ զուգահեռ սկսել է ձևավորվել հիմնական սկզբունքները, ոնց են նրանք հասկանում Հայաստանում։ Ոչ թե Ֆինլանդիայում, Նորվեգիայում, Շվեյցարիայում, բայց ոնց մենք ենք հասկանալու։ Եվ այսօր Հայաստանում կա երկու process, ներքևից վերև հասարակությունը այդ աշխատանքները անում է հասարակական լայն շրջանակներում, հիմնականում տեխնո կամպանիաների շրջանակներում, ռազմամարզական կազմակերպությունների շրջանակներում, մեդիցին սերվիսներով զբաղվող այդ հասարակության հետ աշխատանքները գնում են, բայց վերևից սկսվել է աշխատանքներ, որ այդ համապարփակ հասկացողությունները եւ հույս ունեն, որ մենք ի վերջո կունենանք տեսլական համապարփակ պաշտպանության եւ անվտանգության համակարգի տեսլական Հայաստանում, որի վրա աշխատանքները հիմա գնում են, վերտեղ այդ հիմնական սկզբունքները ձևավորված կլինեն եւ հույսով եմ հետո արդեն կմտածեք ռազմավարականության մասին, implementation-ի մասին, road map-ի մասին, etc. То есть Հայաստանում գնում է այդ առողջ process-ը Երբ ոչ թե վերևից են պարտադրում, բայց ներքևից եւ միասին աշխատանքը սկսվել է եւ 2 տարի այդ աշխատանքը գնում է։ Դրա համար ես հույս ունեմ, որ այդ մեծ ճանապարհի վրա կհասնենք հաջողության, որտեղ ուրիշ ելք չկա։ Եվ դու ունես Թուրքիան որպես թշնամի, դու պարտավոր ես լուծել այս խնդիրը։ Եվ մենք իհարկե տեսնում ենք ոնց է ինչ է պատերազմ ուկրաինականում ձևավորում, բայց մենք սկսել ենք աշխատել 2020 թվականի պատերազմից հետո։ Ելներ որ մեզ սեփական փորձից մենք այդ տեսել ենք ինչքան մեծ նշանակություն ունի երբ չես կարողանում ապահովել հա դրա համար հույս ունեմ որ մենք դրան կհասնենք եւ այդ ճանապարհի վրա դուք իհարկե ճիշտ եք ի վերջո դա բերում է մշակութային փոփոխությունների փոխվում են հարաբերությունները հասարակության հետ պետության հետ եւ այլ բայց այդ երկար process-ը միանգամից չես կարող թռիչք անես դու պետք է աշխատանք անես օրի ճանապարհի վրա եւ օրից կհասնենք դրան ես հույս ունեմ Հայաստանում այդ ճանապարհով գնացել եք ես ճիշտ ասած մի քիչ զարմացած եմ որ մեր ուժային մարմինները բավականին մեզ առաջ բացվել են եւ մենք աշխատանք ենք տանում որովհետեւ բոլոր ռազմական ինստիտուտները իրանք փակ են իրանք կոնսերվատիվ են բնույթով բայց իրանք էլ են հասկանում որ պիտի փոփոխություններ ունենան ես չեմ կարող հիմա ավելին ասել որովհետեւ կան հաջողություններ այդ ճանապարհի վրա եւ հույս ունեմ որ մոտիկա ժամանակներում մենք կունենանք որակյալ փոփոխություններ եւ այդ մոտեցումը պահեստային զորավարժությունների պահեստային աշխատանքի համակարգի ձևավորման աշխատանքները մենք կունենանք որակյալ փոփոխություններ ամեն ինչ դինամիկայի մեջ է այդպես ասեմ այսօր եւ հույս ունեմ ամեն ինչ մենք ճիշտ ճանապարհի վրա ենք
May I ask a question? In terms of the society-wide approach, I guess we're really talking about societal involvement in areas that we previously thought as perhaps being the sole domain of the government. And this may be in terms of just pursuing accountability, in terms of non-governmental involvement, in terms of reducing waste in efficacy. Can we talk a little bit about other examples of other countries where there is a robust involvement of the society in with watchdog functions and certain maybe the exporting or the contracting out of certain elements of the defense security initiative or apparatus movement? Thank you.
I mean, I think in terms of who actually makes this sort of thing work, there are 3 or 4 countries, Estonia and Finland in the north. Sweden is trying to get it back. They had something and they broke it about 20 years ago. Singapore has got an extremely sharp organization because it has to have, because it's small. But apart from those, I'm not sure that many other countries have actually got something that really works well. I mean, there are lots of people who talk about it, lots of countries that talk about it. The oversight of the governance and the actual checking is poor in nearly every country. And I'm going to say it's poor in US, it's poor in UK as well. Oversight has lost its, is that me? Yeah, sorry. Feel that. Oversight has somehow lost its importance, and I think this is one of the degradations of democracy. That democracies they get too involved in too many other things, and forget the importance of actually monitoring properly organizations like defense, interior, police, and everywhere else. So, you know, looking for good examples is actually quite challenging. I mean, I think we've talked about Estonia. You're probably not going to go to Singapore because I don't think you would actually really understand the Singapore situation. Estonia is much more plain and simple. And you can see in Estonia, you can see really actually all the problem areas as well. And I'll give you an example that, you know, when they called up the reserve battalion at one stage, then something like 1/3 of the battalion were abroad. So it's not so comprehensive because there was no system of people saying, you know, I'm going abroad. And then what do? Do you fill in back with someone else, or do you do something? They just didn't have the, you know, the capacity for that. Latvia called up the reserves, and 17 people turned up out of the 300 plus that they actually called, and all the others were out of the country. They just were not there. So you're going to have a problem like this with Armenia as well, because conscripts will finish and then they'll go to university. I mean, I was just talking to a sergeant just yesterday, and I said, "What are you finishing?" He said, "I've got 3 months more to go." He said, "And then I'm going back to university in Austria, where I was before, and I shall probably stay there." So there's that is why you cannot control something like a comprehensive approach. You have to find some method of volunteering, and I'm going to call it chaos, because actually chaos theory is much more effective than control theory in this case. It just is. So you have to find, and unfortunately, when you're talking comprehensive approach or an idea, these ideas with the military want the control system. And it never, in my history, it's never worked. You know, I've never seen control actually work like this, because human nature, human beings, life, everything actually messes it up. You know, you don't have control of the boys, you know, that's it. You only have control of those who've signed a contract full time for you. Finland is moving more and more and more towards volunteer units, because the volunteers turn up. My friend Marcus, I mean, this is serious. My friend Marcus is in a volunteer company that is based in Turku, southwest of southwest of Finland, and their job is the Åland Islands. If Russia goes to the Åland Islands, they are the reconnaissance company to tell the Finns what is happening. They have to do. They're volunteers. One of the tests for the volunteers, the tests: swim 2 kilometers, march 70 kilometers, carrying 30 K on your shoulders. Now, you know, how many ordinary people can do that? But they've got a waiting list to get into the company. A waiting list. That's what happens if you have good volunteer stuff. You get a waiting list because people want to volunteer for things that are real, for things that actually do something. They don't want to volunteer to be a number on a list, ever, because that is counter to human nature. It's counter to what human beings in a democracy are and want to be. Nobody wants to be on a list. Everybody wants to be part of something that is successful. And the harder it is to be part of something, the more people want to do it. That is the dichotomy of human nature. It's the way it works. It's the way people work. It's the way people work. So you've got to not over control, and you've got to find some way of beating the military who want to control. We want to have units. We want everybody. I mean, I sat and listened to this 2 days ago, where everybody in the village is going to do this and everybody's going to do that. And I said, no, they're not. Trust me, they're not going to. You know, you're living in a fool's world. So I finished with that, but you know.
Ես կարող եմ ավելացնեմ, ուրախ եմ, որ գլինի գնահատականը, որովհետև գաղտնիք չեմ բացելու, որովհետև անվտանգության խորհրդի ներքո ստեղծված է աշխատանքային խումբ, որը պետք է ձևավորի տեսլականը համապարփակ պաշտպանության եւ անվտանգության համակարգը, եւ մենք հնարավորություն ենք ունեցել մի հատ այց կատարենք, ուսումնասիրենք փորձը, եւ մենք ընտրել ենք Էստոնիան եւ Ֆինլանդիան, որպես երկրներ, որից փորձը օգտակար կլինի Հայաստանի համար։ Դες մենք հնարավորություն եք ունեցել տեսնեք ոնց է Էստոնիան աշխատում, ես այդ աշխատանքային խումբում եմ եղել են աշխատանքային խումբում անվտանգության խորհրդի ներկայացուցիչները, պարլամենտի ներկայացուցիչները եւ հասարակության ներկայացուցիչները։ Դες հասարակությունը, պարլամենտը եւ Security Council-ը միասին աշխատանքային խումբ են կառուցել եւ աշխատանքային խումբը աշխատում էր։ Իսկ սկզբանե արդեն whole governmental approach-ի մեջ էինք։ Դա յուրահատուկ է Հայաստանի համար եւ յուրահատուկ է սովետական տարածքում, որ իշխանությունները կարողանում են մատինգնալ։ Եվ այո, մենք տեսել ենք ոնց է Էստոնիան աշխատում, մենք այդ հնարավորությունը մեզ տվել են, ծանոթացել են, լավ այցել եւ Ֆինլանդիան։ Իմ անձնական տպավորությունը Ֆինլանդիան մեզ համար իդեալական է, բայց մենք չունենք ֆինանական հասարակություն այսօր։ Հայկական հասարակությունը դա ֆինական հասարակությունը չէ։ Դրա համար մեզ մոտ կոչումները կլինեն ճակատներում կոմպրոմիսային, ավելի մոտիկ Էստոնյանին, բայց ավելի սեղմված մի կողմից, որովհետև մենք ունենք ավելի լուրջ թշնամի, քան թե Էստոնիան։ Էստոնիան ունի ՆԱՏՕ-ն, Էստոնիան Եվրոպայում է, իսկ մենք ունենք Թուրքիա, Իրան, Ռուսաստան։ Դրա համար մեր համակարգը մի կողմից ավելի բան պետք է հարթ պետք է լինի, բայց մյուս կողմից դու պիտի Ֆինլանդիայի նման կարողանաս voluntary մոտեցումները իրականացնես։ Եթե դու չկարողանաս այդ բալանսը գտնես Հայաստանում, դու չես կարողանալու ստանալ համապարփակ մոտեցում։ Դա համար ես ասացի, որ փաստորեն խոսքը գնում է նոր պայմանագրի մասին հայկական ժողովրդի եւ հայկական պետության հետ։ Բացի դրանից հայ ժողովուրդը ավելի լայն հասկացողություն է, քո ժողովրդի 80%-ը պետությունից դուրս է։ Դա համար քո համապարփակը ավելի դժվար խնդիր պիտի լուծի, ոնց է ողջ հայության ներուժը կարողանում մտցնել նման համապարփակ աշխատանքների մեջ, համակարգի մեջ, անպայման չէ որ բոլորը զգեստ հագնեն ռազմական։ Այսօրվա պատերազմը ավելի լայն է, շատ դոմեյների մեջ է, դրա համար դու պիտի կարողանաս այդ synchronization-ը գտնես, եւ այդ synchronization-ի մեջ դու հնարավորություն ունես պարտադրես։ Դու չես կարող հայության 80%-ին պարտադրես մտնես համակարգի մեջ։ Բայց եթե մենք այդ խնդիրը չլուծենք, մենք չենք կարողանալու Հայաստանի պետական ինքնաիշխանությունը պաշտպանենք։ Մենք չենք կարողանալու դիմադրել։ Դրա համար մենք այդ խնդիրը լուծելու ենք։ Բայց այդ ոչ թե մի օրվա լուծում է, ոչ թե մի տարվա լուծում է, դա երկար ճանապարհ է, որը մենք պիտի սկսենք անցնել։ Եվ Հայաստանում արդեն 2 տարուց մի քիչ շատ մենք սկսել ենք այդ ճանապարհով գնալ։
Thank you. Stefan, do you have a question?
Thank you both. You know, we always discuss the issue around like Turing initiative and also lack of critical thinking. What's the first step in trying to devolve some responsibility around the armed forces and, you know, trying to give people individual agency to kind of affect change and take initiative around important issues? Thank you.
I think the first challenge is finding champions inside the armed forces because they are the sticking point. I don't think society is in the sticking point. I mean, I've always said that, you know, if you want a volunteer unit to work, it's actually quite simple. You need a base, you need a flag, you need a task, you need a commanding officer, and you need a few radios and some money for beer. And when you put all those things together, people will come, especially if you link it to the name of the village. So-and-so platoon, and you got the name of the village, and you got the regional or village flag. Then those things, amazingly, people come to that. It just happens because they don't want to be left out. So, you know, this whole thing of human nature is it's interlinked. But this is an extreme challenge for the military to actually to give up ownership of something in a way, and to create something that is societal rather than control and discipline. So finding champions who've got enough, you know, balls, basically, courage to actually to push the system to open itself up is the big challenge. In fact, it's almost the only challenge. Once you go past that step, if the military will accept those very simple steps, the rest of it will fall into place faster than you can shake a stick at.
Դա բավականին դժվար խնդիր է, ես համաձայն եմ Գլենի հետ, եւ նորից ամեն բավականին դժվար եւ ամեն երկիր այդ խնդիրը լուծում է իր յուրահատուկ մոտեցումներով։ Դու չես կարող վերցնել ինչ-որ երկրի մոդել եւ բերես այստեղ։ Կարող եք խոսել ինչ էլեմենտներ են մտնելու այդ մոդելի մեջ։ Այդ մոդելում լինելու են կոնվենցիոնալ ուժեր, լինելու են տարածքային պաշտպանության ուժեր, լինելու են պահեստային ստորաբաժանումներ, բատալյոններ, լինելու են հատուկ նշանակության զորքեր, որ այդ ամեն ինչը միասին համակվում են։ Ոնց է այդ մոդելի մեջ ամեն իրան հետ աշխատում, ոնց է համընկնում, դա համապատասխանում է քո երկրի հնարավորություններին, քո երկրի խնդիրներին, landscape-ին եւ այլն։ Հայաստանում նման մոդել հիմա ձևավորվում է, ես չեմ ուզում բացած խոսացնել, բայց հույս ունեմ մինչև տարվա վերջը կամ 2024 թվականում ռազմական ուժերի կառուցվածքման մոդելը, որը ավելի լայն է, քան թե միայն կոնվենցիոնալ բանակը, հիմա դա ձևավորվում է։ Այդ խնդիրների շուրջ դիսկուսիաներ, բախումներ, հասարակությունը ներգրավելով, բայց հիմնականում պաշտպանության նախարարության ներքո դա այդ աշխատանքները գնում են։ Իսկ մենք հասկանում ենք այդ խնդիրների խորությունը, լայնությունը եւ պատրաստում ենք պատասխան։ Բայց նորից կվերջացնեմ, ամեն երկրում դա յուրահատուկ է։ Դու հնարավորություն չունես վերցնես Մեծ Բրիտանիայի փորձը կամ Ֆինլանդիայի փորձը եւ տեղադրես Հայաստանում։ Դու պարտավոր ես քոնը ձևավորես, որը հիմնում է քո աշխատող ինստիտուշնների, ռազմական ինստիտուշնների վրա, փորձի, սպայական կազմի հնարավորությունների, քո հասարակության հնարավորությունների վրա, քո հատուկ զորքերի հնարավորությունների վրա եւ այլն։ Բայց ուրիշ ելք չկա, դու պիտի դա գտնես եւ պիտի անես։
And that was the final question of the panel and the conference, unless we have one more. Yeah, Sirov.
So just a little anecdote or joke as a continue. Yesterday you said that you should try to be like a hedgehog, thorny and prickly, so they don't bite you. So I wanted to tell this joke about the hedgehog joke. It's an old joke. So there's this hedgehog, he's sitting on a fence and he looks left and he's like, I'm strong. And he looks right and he's like, I'm strong. He looks left again, he's like, I'm strong. And then there is a bear passing by, sees the hedgehog, kicks it. The hedgehog goes 10 meters away and falls down and sits up and he's like, I'm strong, but light.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to say it got run over, but okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone in our audience here and online. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Arzumanyan, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant. Thank you.